Well, hello, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers. I'm your host, David the Skeptic, and I'm joined by the other guy, David Russell. How you doing?
Hey, buddy, how are you? I'm good.
Doing great. Okay, and we've got a couple of guests here at Skeptics and Seekers Towers. We've got Chase,
Hello, hello.
the man who will chase the bear, and we also have Teddy, the bear. How you
Hello,
doing, Teddy?
everyone. How are y'all?
Great. Wave to
Uh,
everyone, Teddy. Wait, no, we can't. Okay, never mind. Teddy is not on video. That will not be her only disadvantage today. She also has the disadvantage of having a terrible argument to defend. And so
you haven't heard it yet.
it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But yeah, here
Proof's
we
in the
go.
pudding.
Yeah. So, folks, we're going to serve you up some pudding. Don't eat it. Um, so, here we go. I'm just going to jump right into it
All
after
right.
I tell you about next week's topic, because I always forget to talk about the following week's topic, and we actually have a following week's topic, and so I want to tell you about it. I'm really excited. If you find this show really boring, which you won't. But if you want something to look forward to, if you tune out of this one, make sure you tune into next week, because next week we are talking about politics, people. But it's not politics, the discussion that you really want. It's politics, an overview of what politics is and what it means in a Christian worldview. And so we're going to talk about it at a fairly high level. I suspect that we will have other shows on politics delving into specific issues. And so I just wanted to prepare you for that show next week. This week, slavery. It's taken up space on the board. It's taken up space on your head. We're going to get that all cleared up today. Biblical slavery. The blog has already been posted. Some of you have already started commenting. And we're just going to unravel the thesis in our opening statements. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Darren, and the rest for starting the comments. I want to read a part of something that Darren posted, and I also want to cite some of what Peter posted. And if you want your comments showing up in the podcasts, you don't have to wait to our comment section shows. When I put the blog up early, just post a comment there. When I see something interesting, I'll point it out. So without any further ado, and for the first time ever, we will hear Teddy's argument on biblical slavery, why God is not, in fact, a moral monster. Teddy, it's all yours.
Thank you, David. So when we're talking about biblical, quote unquote, slavery, the well has already been poisoned just by the use of the term slavery, because for people living today, when we think of the word slavery, it's natural for us to conjure up the images of the horrific situation that had occurred during the antebellum South in the United States of America. And we think of that as slavery, and that basically affects everything that we think about it. And so when you talk about slavery in the Bible, how does that square with a loving God, given that there were regulations for slavery in the Mosaic Code? So that doesn't make sense. And there's a reason why that doesn't make sense, and that is because that what we think of as slavery was not what God had regulations for. So let's get to the word. First of all, the Hebrews, in Hebrew, there isn't a word for slavery. And when you look at the Bible, the word in Hebrew that was used was eved. That's E-B-E-D. And the majority of the time, what that means is servant, and it relates to work. And it's not an inherently negative word. It deals with usually a relationship where someone is dependent upon someone else. And there have been times when being in a bed can even be a position of honor. Uh, in the Old Testament, they didn't even really refer so much as to the Hebrews, the Israelites, as being the Ebeds or Eveds of the Pharaoh, but they actually referred to the Egyptians as the Eveds of Pharaoh because they were serving their Pharaoh. And when we get to the King James version of the Bible, which came about in 1611, what we see is that the word Eved occurred only two times in the King James version, and that was once in the Old Testament and once in the New Testament. But now, with the New King James Version and all of these other versions and translations of the Bible in the 20th century, we see anywhere from 46 occurrences of the word slave, where Eved has been translated into the word slave. And so we see this increasing use of the word Eved being used as slave in some occasions. In some situations, it's used as servant. And the thing that becomes very problematic is that everywhere we see servant and slave in the Bible, those are all the same word, Eved. And so it is the person or the people doing the translations that are basically picking and choosing when to use servant and when to use slave. And when we look at the word slave through the lens of modern times, where we are associating slave with what was happening during the whole transatlantic slave trade, then that poisons the well, because now I'm having to dig out from underneath that, as opposed to starting in a neutral position of servant or worker, which, there's nothing inherently or fundamentally negative or evil about that. And so let's, if we could all, because I know especially with the atheists, if you can just suspend your disbelief and just actually listen to what I have to say, because look, if you want to be an atheist, you can still very much so be an atheist without believing that God is somehow endorsing the institution of slavery, or that he even condoned it. Because let me tell you, the person and people that think that are basically potentially emboldening Christians into thinking that, hey, that's okay. And if there's anybody out there who seriously thinks that that's a good idea, well, you might want to rethink that. So, you don't have to give up your atheism, and you can, I'm sure, find other things, as y'all have, to criticize God about. But in terms of this particular issue, not only is it invalid to try to paint the Mosaic laws as somehow endorsing or condoning or approving of what we think of as slavery with our modern lens that we look through. But that's just a very, very dangerous thing, because if y'all are out here saying that, oh, the Bible thinks it's okay, then, that really can embolden certain warped Christians to think, well, hey, God said it's okay, so let's maybe keep doing this in places that they are doing it, or let's bring it back. So just be cautious about that, because that's a really bad idea. So when we talk about suspending disbelief, so let's please do that and look at things. So the first thing is, I'm going to mention some biblical passages, and we're then I hope that we can maybe later, I'll bring up sort of a thought experiment for us to consider when we start discussing things. But for example, Acts 17:26 says that God has made us all from one blood. He has made from one blood every nation of men. In Galatians 3:28, it says, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. In Deuteronomy 10:17 through 19, it says, for the Lord your God is a God of gods and a Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He administers justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger, giving him food and clothing. Therefore, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And he's speaking directly to the Israelites right there, who, of course, had a 400 plus year experience with slavery in Egypt. And so, one would think that it would hurt their hearts to try to do that to someone else. In Leviticus 19:33, it says, if a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. In Leviticus 19:34, it says, but the stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And so one of the things that we also need to keep in mind is that when strangers or foreigners, shall we say, came to Israel, because God had given the land of Israel to the Israelites, foreigners could not acquire land. And the only way that they could live in Israel was to attach themselves to a household. And so one of the things, so with those biblical passages in mind, to frame how God thinks of all people, we are all brothers and sisters. And he is specifically telling the Israelites, this is how you need to treat foreigners and strangers in your land. And remember that you were slaves and foreigners in a strange land for over 400 years. And also that God is a God who will judge us. And so he reminds us in other passages, hey, don't forget, you mess with people and you treat them badly on earth, you're going to be judged one day. So the Israelites were very keenly aware of all of this. And so, with our thought experiment, think of if there's a situation where people are working, and of course, we're talking about servitude and working with people, working for people. That's a spectrum. I mean, you've got sweatshops, you've got people who just are workers, at will, where if they want to leave, they can leave. If the employer wants to fire them, they can fire them. It will. And there's situations where people are out and out slaves, as the Africans were in the United States and also in colonial America. So it's a spectrum. And one of the things with the use of Aved in the Bible is that these translators keep switching the words. So we never really know, unless we were to look up. Well, I mean, you just actually never really know when is it supposed to be servant, or when are they potentially talking about slave. It gets muddled and it becomes problematic. So, but in terms of the thought experiment, if we have a situation to where it's prohibited to kidnap slaves, and that if a person is guilty of kidnapping, not kidnapping slaves, but if it's impermissible to kidnap someone in order to turn them into a slave, and if the punishment, if one is caught doing so, if one is caught having a person in your quote unquote possession who has been kidnapped, if that is punished by the death penalty, let's keep in mind, if that's the situation, that you kidnap someone, you get the death penalty. How about when we have a situation if a slave is brutally beaten and killed, and that yields the death penalty? And then what if we have a situation to where if a slave is beaten and the slave is injured, has some sort of significant injury from that, but is not dead, but then they have to be released if you hurt them in a significant way. And then if slavery is not race-based, if sexual exploitation and rape are not permitted, otherwise that could get one into a tremendous amount of trouble, and potentially even the death penalty, according to Mosaic law. If the families are not being sold and separated by buyers, if servants and slaves are treated as members of a household and they share meals together, and if servants or slaves get every seventh day off, and if things become abusive in the household or under a particular master, that a slave can just run away, and that the people in the country that the slave is still in have to give that slave safe harbor. And then, most importantly, when God is commanding masters to love their servants as themselves and to be very good towards them. So if we have these particular conditions in play in terms of as being the rules that one is supposed to follow, how in the world would true chattel slavery, such as what we had in the antebellum South, where people were treated like property with no human rights, and where they had no protections, and where the master could do whatever he wanted to do to them, including kill them. How square that, which was in the American South, with the conditions that I first described? The answer is you cannot. Those two things are in those two situations are incompatible, absolutely incompatible. And one of the biggest ways that we know that it was incompatible is what was done with what was called the Slave Bible. And the Slave Bible, that was where 90% of the Old Testament was removed from the Bible, and about 50% of the New Testament was removed from it. And what that amounts to is, out of 1,189 chapters that are normally in a Bible, the Slave Bible contained only 232 chapters. And as you can imagine, the chapters that were removed had to do with a lot of positive messages that would have emboldened slaves into thinking, about more uprisings and fighting, as opposed to being brainwashed into thinking, and by twisting certain passages that are in the Bible that talk about how slaves need to obey their masters. But, as we'll, I'm certain, get into as we start to discuss things, one has to look at those passages in context. But when they were presented out of context in the Slave Bible, that was giving slaves a very, very different idea of how God was expecting them to behave. And it was very subversive. And the abolitionists, they had the Bible 100% right. And it was the Bible that was what inspired the abolitionists to help bring about the Civil War, and to spark it, and to then eventually get rid of the whole nasty, disgusting institution of slavery in the United States with the 13th Amendment in 1865. And so, the Slave Bible, that just proves it all in terms of the fact that when you look at the Bible as a whole, it is incompatible with slavery. And it was only through ripping out most of the Bible that these slave owners were able to deceive their slaves. So anyway, we'll get into a lot of the other things once we start the discussion. But thank you very much.
Chase.
Okay, so I would like to start off by saying, as far as this being the first time I make such an argument, I would like to say, as far as concerning what the God of the Bible endorses, this is a subject on which I can positively say he does endorse slavery, especially slavery relating to what we had here in our own South. And I would like to start off by pointing that out with the rule and even how that works out with just this one verse. Leviticus 25, 44, 46. As for your male and female slaves from whom you may have, you may buy the male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you and their clan that are with you, who have been born in your land, and they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. You may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule over one another ruthlessly. So that right there lays out clearly to me that God had every intention of people who had any intention of owning other people. It seems there was a positive role in how you were able to do that. While you were saying the God of the Bible does not condone, and actually he is against slavery, I would have to say otherwise. I would say a person who has ground rules for something and also does not actively speaks against it, that would be a form of condoning. So to put it quite simply, he has even more rules as to how it should and shouldn't be played out, and we copied those rules here in our very own South. So just because they were giving a different copy to the slaves does not mean in any way that that is not the same form of slavery, and that is not one also endorsed by the God that you believe in. As far as your comment saying that these will be, they need to do that, and if they had given them the regular Bible, you would see a lot more uprisings. We know that that would not be true as well, because of the Bible, which also says, slaves, obey your earthly masters. That does not sound like words of revolution. Sorry. So for this argument, it's quite clear that the God of the Bible does endorse slavery, does condone slavery, and I guess I would say, as we get into more of your argument, I would love to see how he does not. Now, if you're going to say that going into the New Testament, that's where maybe these laws fall apart, I would argue that I would still disagree, because in the words of Jesus, these rules are not to be fallen apart just because he's come. He's actually come to fulfill those laws in a sense, which make solidify those rules. So all of these rules, that whether it be on slavery, on what fish not to eat, what colors not to wear, all of these rules will be enforced as you so think, or were enforced as you so think when Jesus died, as you think in history. So it would be a mental gymnastics to me to say that the God of the Bible does not condone or enforce slavery in any way, shape, or form, just because he has lines pointing out not to do it to your own people. Now, it sounds like you are holding very firmly to just looking at the guidelines for what I can say is, actual temporary servant work, where it's only 7 years long. Well, this is pertaining to very special situations in which it is only for your own brothers, people who are of your people, so to speak, and not only that, but it even gives you ways on how to even make those people around you permanent slaves as well. We can get into that as we go further in. But for this one, I do not have a long bit to say on it. I think that is all for me.
Right on. I'm going to take over, right, David? Oh, you're muted, buddy. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Oh, Russell. Sorry.
I do want to say that I'm disappointed that the eye patch does not have decor on it yet.
You don't know how hard this is.
I have given you suggestion upon suggestion.
I have no.
I need you to put some flair out there, brother. And I'm throwing this in because we got to break the ice a little bit. This is a serious subject, right?
So I mean, to sing a new color.
I don't.
Yeah. But yeah, so like, I'll get in my opening in a minute. But I was just like, I'm not gonna scream and yell. You know me. I'm not gonna get mad about this. I mean, we have a disagreement on things. That's fine. You can disagree, and at the end of the day, still pat each other on the back. At least that's from my take anyway. But again, I want to thank. I'll get in now. Now I'm getting into my opening statement, so you can tell me if you need to, David. Again, I want to thank the Skeptics and Seekers family for such a warm welcome. Thanks to David and Chase for partaking in this dialogue, because I think it is very important. It's a very important issue to discuss. It's one that we should never forget, because we can never let stuff like this happen again. Thanks to Teddy for coming to my aid and backing me up here. Nothing like a familiar face or voice. That said, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for any side. Is there slavery in the Bible? Absolutely. Are there hard verses that I've even struggled with regarding this topic? Absolutely. Leviticus 25 is just one of the verses that took me a while to wrap my mind around. You know, David told me to bone up on this topic, but I don't feel like I can do it justice in just a week's time. He also was kind enough to provide us with a write-up, which was really cool. I kind of hoped he would put it in this intro to our show here, sliding up in the true Star Wars prologue style, you know, even with the music in the back. That would have been awesome. But surrounding this issue are terms, okay? And the first, what is slavery, okay? Is slavery an enslavement, or the state and condition of being a slave, who is someone forbidden to quit their master's service or their service to another person and is treated like property, or enslaved person is legally rendered the personal property of the slave owner. Like in the antebellum period, the owner had the only say. Other definitions include forced labor and non-voluntary service. Most of us look at slavery in the West from the eyes of the European slave trade, in which people were kidnapped from parts of Africa and shipped to the colonies and forced to work on plantations. And many died in transit, treated horribly by those who bought them, dehumanized and abused beyond measure. This often taints our view when we look at other forms of slavery or servitude throughout history. As well it should, because again, we need to remember the antebellum period, so that we never take a step backwards. We should also be able to look through our bias and seriously question what we see throughout history. My interlocutor, with the awesome pirate look, has defined good as well-being. With taking the Sam Harris approach, I have to ask him, why would he think it is actually, as he put it, horrible to own slaves? Is it actually wrong? The reason I ask is that in ancient Israel, the taking of a slave was to prevent poverty. Preventing poverty actually promotes human flourishing and well-being. But to truly know this, David would have to have looked into the historical context of that time period. Matt Dillahunty, in a talk with Dr. Farrer, told him he didn't care about the historical context of the time, to which Dr. Farrer responded, then you don't care what the text means. This, unfortunately, is true. It is also true of the write-up David put up. He attempted to exegete the scripture with only 20th century eyes, not only 20th century eyes, but with a bias against the text. It is obvious with the closing remark he gave. I still love him, though, so we're good. To me, the bias clouds his objectivism. However, it also shows that he didn't look into the historical context of the time, which is the main point. The rest is, I'm kind of playing with him a little bit here. The fact is, scholars actually don't even agree on the definition of slavery. But in brief, most varieties of slavery did not exhibit the three elements that were dominant in the New World. Slaves as property and commodities, their use exclusively as labor, and their lack of freedom. And I mean, the ancient Near East concept of slavery or servitude is so foreign to us. It is akin to calling the president's cabinet members slaves. Manumission, which is the release of a slave, wasn't even sought after because of the deep familial bonds created, which also created great incentive to stay. Basically, there was no incentive to be free. Why? Because according to Glenn Miller, who's quoting here from the History of the Ancient Near East, which is a 2-volume set comprised of 22 anthropologists and specialists in ancient Near Eastern culture, says individual autonomy meant exposure to danger and predation. Safety lie precisely in the protection afforded by the bondage of dependence on groups and patrons. What was desirable was not freedom, but belongingness. To understand Israel's system of servitude, the first thing to note, as stated by the ancient Near Eastern law, servitude was voluntary. Okay, it was voluntary, even to the foreigner. There's a huge difference between a master and an owner. Why? The language is legal language. The language differentiates between them. You could own things like cattle and oxen, but a human bore the image of God, and thus humans could not be owned like chattel. Also, property wasn't what you think of it as it is today. Property, usually in legal terms, were relegated to economic output only, no ownership of a disposable good. Exodus 21:16 puts the slavery that went on in the antebellum period punishable by death. Finally, the passage David shared in Leviticus is void of the entirety of the two books before it. It should be noted that the passage says they can be made slaves for life, not that they were automatically slaves for life. Freedom was always the default. Similarly, we look at the New Testament and see a fuller picture of what David gave us in his blog, which I was a little disappointed in, David. You didn't treat the text fairly. There's a lot of freedom verses in there, too. For example, Paul explicitly denounces slave trading, which would have restricted the supply of slaves to Christian households. Paul tells free people not to become slaves. Paul tells slaves to try to become free. 2 Corinthians 7:21 and 7:23. Paul encouraged Philemon to free Onesimus in the epistle at the 21st verse. What is Paul doubling down on here then? He's obviously pro-freedom. He's anti-involuntary slavery. He's anti-voluntary slavery. And he's an advocate of respect, consideration, loyalty, and goodwill in all relationships, including master and servant. And he's also pro-voluntary manumission. The truth is, the New Testament is about freedom. The moral ideal puts us on a trajectory which includes the dignity for all and the things like liberty and right relationship with others and God. What we didn't see is that the masters are being corrected just as much as the slaves to treat them as equals, which is an unheard of proposition in that time. So with that, I'll end with the slaves for Christ idea. In 1 Corinthians 7:22, to be a servant to the Lord is to be the Lord's freedman. In 2 Corinthians, we are also told that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. So, again, I see the New Testament and the entirety of the Bible as not condoning slavery. It deals with slavery. As a matter of fact, God legislates it. And there's many reasons for that. He does legislate that practice in the ancient Near East. His idea was not to be like the abusive slave traders of Israel or of Egypt, but to have a different system that pointed them to a path of abundant freedom. Thank you.
Okay. So, I guess I should say something. I've written a blog post, and this is one of those times when I encourage people to read the blog. Skeptics and Seekers .squarespace.com, and the current blog is Slaves for Christ, a brief look at biblical slavery. And so if you want my full argument, you can read it there. I think it speaks for itself largely. I know that there are podcast listeners who don't get around to reading the blog, and I get that, and I appreciate that, but I don't want to spend a lot of time reading or saying what can easily be looked up, because a lot of the blog post is spent in Scripture. It's spent just reciting what the Bible says. So I don't know if I just lost my co-host or not, but his video just disappeared. If we did lose him, we'll...
I'm here.
Okay,
I just had to turn off the camera for a minute.
Oh, good. All right. Well, I'm sure we don't want to see whatever it is you're doing anyway, but now I kind of do. Anyway, I don't want to spend a lot of time just reading Bible verses. That's kind of boring. It doesn't make very good podcasting, and Christians should know their Bible well enough, especially on this subject, since it has been such a hot button topic. But I know that Christians don't read their Bible. They don't know it's there. They're easily swayed by hearing another Christian say, "Oh, well, the Bible doesn't say this, and it says this other thing that's barely related," and they think they've read it. So I do encourage you to read the blog. I do provide scriptures in context, and what you need to know is that the passages I've provided are just for a minimum case. I could have made this 3,000 word blog post a 10,000 word blog post. The Bible has much more to say, and I think that some of the passages are even more damning. And so it's hard to find scholars such as, say, Randall Rauser, who would deny the point that I am making, that in the Bible, slavery was, in fact, as bad as antebellum slavery, as bad as the worst kind of slavery you can think of. So one of the tools that Christians might use, and you've heard the opening statement from Teddi, is to try to make it a linguistic case. You're just confused because you're speaking English, and what you really should be speaking is ancient Hebrew, and even the translators of the Bible didn't use the words right, and so now we don't actually know what's being said. Actually, that sounds like an argument from an atheist, doesn't it? You just can't trust the Bible because it's not translated right. What an argument for a Christian to make. Thank you, Teddi. I appreciate that. Maybe as we go along, you can make some of my other arguments for me too. But in this case, I think this is one of the rare times when that just doesn't work. I think the Bible says too much about slavery, and it's pretty clear when it talks about it. I know it's always a fingers crossed scenario when you talk about the Bible clearly says, but I think there's enough language here that is easily readable to the average reader, that if it does not mean what it sounds like it means, then that's just reason for you not to read the Bible or trust it for anything. Yvette, so she hangs a big piece of her case on Yvette. So I just encourage you to go back and read all of the slavery passages and substitute slave with Yvette. See if that helps. It does not. Let me help you with that. You can substitute it with any word you want. It still doesn't help. You can take the word out altogether and just read the surrounding words. It still doesn't help. The message still comes through loud and clear. And so I think that we can dispense with that. As far as the New Testament being a case for freeing the slaves, well, this is just not true. Although I will leave room that in the Bible, different authors had different ideas about different things at different times. And so I'm not suggesting that they are all perfectly consistent on a given subject. And so some authors might have been more pro-freedom than others. I don't think that Paul was one of them. I think that you have to read what he says in a fairly strained way. So, for instance, Onesimus was mentioned. This is the book of Philemon. You can read it. It's one chapter. It's real easy to read. It's in the New Testament. Let's look it up in the index. You'll find it. Philemon. It's a book about slavery. There was an escaped slave who became a Christian, who ran across Paul, and Paul converted him. And you know what Paul did for Philemon? He didn't say, here are some good families that you can stay with. They'll give you a good job. Glad you escaped. No, he sent Onesimus back to the slave master Philemon. And he tried to say to Philemon, look, you should now serve your master even more heartily because you're brothers in Christ. And Philemon, you should treat your slave as a brother and not just a slave. He's you should treat him as something more. But what Paul did not do was shelter Philemon from this slavery. Now, we also heard a case which I find utterly baffling. I hope we discuss that slavery was somehow voluntary. These people wanted to be slaves. They didn't want freedom. Manumission. What's manumission? No, we want the family of being a part of your family by being a slave. That's what we're after. Obviously Onesimus wanted freedom. You know how we know that? He escaped. Okay. This is not a guy who wanted freedom. This is a guy who had to be strong-armed into going back to his master under the aegis of this is how God wants it to be, because you're a Christian now. And so you shouldn't be trying to escape this man who is your master, who is also a Christian. This is not a person who wanted to be a slave. This is a person who was talked into going back to his master. And so, again, I find it utterly baffling that we would hang a part of the argument on, these slaves in the Bible, they wanted to be slaves. And finally, the idea that slavery in the Bible is different from the African slave trade because they were kidnapped in the African slave trade, and they were procured honestly in the Bible. A couple of things, really. What does it mean to procure honestly a slave? What does that mean? Because these people were bought, they were purchased like property. The Bible says several times, if you buy a slave, or you can buy your slaves from this place or that, and so. How does a person find themselves for sale? Just a little bit of a discussion, thought question there for people who think there's some kind of difference between kidnapping and legally purchasing a person. But I also want to give you just a small amount of education on the African slave trade. Those slaves were purchased, not kidnapped. And so the people who went to Africa bought with money from other Africans, these Africans that they would put on the boats through the Middle Passage and back to the cotton fields. This was a legal transaction, not kidnapping. Read your history. And on this subject, many Christians are just as poorly read on their history as they are their Bible. That is not, in fact, a distinction, and I challenge the interlocutors who are supporting the biblical slavery to come up with a single meaningful way in which the biblical slavery was different from other slavery. The term chattel slavery, whenever you hear Christians talking about chattel slavery, it's almost certain that their case is done at that point, because they are, in fact, trying to make a distinction between biblical slavery and African slavery. The word chattel just means property. Chattel slavery is property slavery, or the act of owning a person. Just look it up yourself in any dictionary that you want. Any dictionary, I don't care. Surprise me. Look it up in a Bible dictionary. Don't care. It's going to come up with that very generic definition. And so to make a denial that slavery in the Bible, at least some types of the slavery in the Bible, did not involve a person owning another person, is just being intellectually dishonest, and maybe dishonesty at another level too. And so it's very hard to take those arguments seriously. That said, we will see where the discussion goes from here. I want to enter a period of QA as we've each kind of heard what the other has to say to start with, and I want to begin the QA. So we'll just go around in this order. I'll ask a question. Teddy can ask a question. Russell can ask a question, and then Chase can ask a question. And we might go through more than one round of this, and you can ask your question to anyone on the panel. So I'm going to ask my question to Teddi, and
Yes.
It's a very straightforward question. So do you, in fact, recognize that there was more than one kind of slavery in the Bible? Because you seem to be focused on the type of slavery that I would call debt slavery. I've got a debt, and so I'm going to sell myself for a period or contract myself to do a period of work for a person to pay off a debt. And by the way, if I earn enough money, or if one of my relatives want to buy me out of that debt and pay that debt, great, they can do that. So that's one type of slavery in the Bible. I don't even call that slavery. And then there are the types of slavery in the Bible that Chase and I are talking about. Do you acknowledge that there is more than one type of slavery in the Bible, or do you want to maintain that it's only talking about the thing that most of us would barely even call slavery?
I do acknowledge that there are different forms of servitude, and I think that when we use the word slavery, that conjures up the imagery of the antebellum South. That if we're going to use that word, my point is, yes, I do think that there were different types. We had the situation where native-born Jews, Israelites, would go into this type of indentured servitude with their fellow Israelites, as well as foreigners. Foreigners could also own or have that type of indentured servitude from Israelites, and so foreigners were able to prosper.
Right. So let me just clarify in terms of clarity, because I think you're wondering a bit. Yes, there is this type of slavery that Jews could sell themselves to foreigners to, and Jews could sell themselves to other Jews to. And this was a temporary financial arrangement. It would end in 7 years if no one chose to pay up. During the period of Jubilee, it's over. By the way, it wouldn't necessarily be in 7 years. If you sold yourself into slavery in year 6, you got 1 year to serve. Everyone's free in Jubilee. And so there is that type of debt servitude, if you will, indentured service that, once again, I discard even as counting as slavery. I am asking you very specifically about the but I don't want to spend all day on my question. I just want an answer to it. Okay. Do you acknowledge that that when Jews owned non-Jews, that there was a different set of rules, and it was ownership as opposed to a mere work contract? Yes or no?
Well, it's not as simple as that. These foreigners did not have the ability to own land, so they had to have attachment.
Can I have a yes or no to that question?
But it's not a yes or no answer. So if you want an honest, legitimate answer that speaks to truth, then just hold on. So the situation with foreigners, and you have different classifications of those as well. You have the foreigners that decided to convert into worship Yahweh, and they then would have pretty much almost all of the benefits that native-born Jews had, with the exception of land, but and the whole Jubilee issue. But so yes, they would, if a foreigner decided to get into this sort of contractual relationship with a Jew, then yes, that was not just for a certain period of time. That was supposed to be forever. But
that's not a contractual relationship. They were bought. Okay. They didn't make a deal.
Yes, David, it says acquire, and yes, they do make a deal. That's stated elsewhere in Leviticus 19 and so forth.
Hang on though. We'll get there. But Teddy, Yeah,
It's
I do.
voluntary. No, hold on, just let me finish, because I will get to the involuntary part too. Um, but so
That's what we're asking about.
generally
Okay.
speaking, with the
So I'm
with
not
the
gonna have
foreigners-
any follow up on this. So after you're done making your speech, you can go ahead and ask your question. I think my question was pretty straightforward, and the answer is already
but
just
but
turned
it's not
into
well, but
Sounds like it's,
there's complexity to it. There's a lot of complexity.
Of
to
course
it.
there is.
So-
but anyway, you're free to ask your question if you
Okay,
like.
but, well, if I could just finish, because I do want to answer it in full. So I there's a type of foreigner where the servitude is voluntary, but it is for life because, well, they don't have the ability to own land. However, if the situation ever becomes abusive, it's in the Mosaic law. They could just leave. They can leave, and every Israelite is commanded to give them safe harbor. So that right there means that master knows that you better make the situation for your servant or slave, whatever you want to call them, it better be a good situation for you and a good situation for them, or else they're going to hightail it out of there, and everybody else in the nation has to give them cover. They cannot, unlike with the antebellum South, where it is mandated to either, well, you can kill a runaway slave or you have to return them. In Israel, under Mosaic law, you better not return them. You cannot return them. You should not return them, is what God tells the Israelites. So if you've got a situation to where if your master becomes abusive, you've got all the freedom in the world from God to just leave, and everybody's going to give you cover. Now, there is a type of involuntary servitude, but that's not what we are really talking about, because the involuntary servitude deals with prisoners of war, and not all prisoners of war had to be placed in a position of involuntary servitude, but that would be consistent more with what we would call forced labor, not slavery. And it's the type of forced labor that happens right now in America.
Just as a point of clarification, this is not a follow-up question. It's just a point of clarification.
Sure.
You said a few times back that these foreigners were not permitted to own land. The passage that Chase read talked about getting your slaves from the nations around you.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying they couldn't own land in their own nations?
No, I mean,
I don't understand
land
what the
in
hell you're
Israel.
talking about.
I mean, the foreigner that is coming to Israel cannot own land in Israel.
Okay,
So how does this mean a slave from a nation?
The Bible does talk about buying these foreigners who live among you, but it also talks about buying these foreigners from the other nations. And so we're not necessarily talking about getting slaves who are sitting right there next to you. We're talking about buying slaves from the surrounding nations. I don't see what you mean that they couldn't own land. Yeah, they couldn't own land in Israel, but I don't see why that would then make them want to be a slave in Israel.
Yeah, but David, you do understand. Hold on, Teddy. David, you do understand that in the historical context, these are tent people, right? I mean, these are people that live in tents, and there's a fine distinction between a sojourner and a foreigner, right? There's a stranger, and then there's a sojourner. The sojourner is passing through, and you may if you look at any
I would argue people who are fighting people behind walled cities have a little bit more step up from tents.
But I'm gonna make sure that
the Canaanites were absolutely
that they've conquered and things that they've also obtained through these wars. So that is things that more than tents they most definitely do have. Sorry.
Hello. we're not to the general conversation and name calling session yet. That's coming. just hold your fire. I just want to finish up the QA section. I wanted to get a clarification on that from Teddy because it did seem incoherent to me at the time. I will accept her answer. Teddy, would you like to ask someone a question?
Yeah, well, can I still get into the whole thing with
we're going to
lands?
have some general discussion, but I want you to stay focused on your question because right now you're not really answering the question, you're making a speech. So please ask a question.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So David, if the law of the land states that a slave, if things become abusive, they can just leave, just walk out, and that everyone in the land in Israel is commanded to give them safe harbor, how can it make sense that a master is going to mistreat his, whether you want to call it a servant, slave, worker, whatever? Why would they mistreat them when the person is then going to leave and then have a status of a free person?
Would you like to provide some biblical reference to that and some context, if you please? But my top of the head answer is the Bible actually talks about ways in which a master can beat and cause their servant to physically suffer as long as they don't die within a couple of days. So that was apparently okay. That's not considered mistreatment. So I would wonder what your idea of mistreatment is. Now, if the slaves suffered particular types of injuries, they lost an eye or a broken arm or something like that, I don't have this passage in front of me, but then that slave could be let free. So that is one of the provisions under the law. But that had to do with the master going too far in their beatings. So I'm glad that's there. But if you're suggesting that, the slave could just leave whenever he wanted to, that's not true. And so you're simply misreading the text. And so that's why I would love for you to put this in the context of a text.
Yeah. Let me pull up the text. I don't have it.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, if you need to find that in our time of general discussion, you can come back to that. And yes. I will address this again, but the answer is ultimately the Bible does make provision for how much beating you can give a slave. And
no. You're making it into a positive. The Bible does not say, hey, beat your slave this many times. It is saying that if you do beat them, and of course they specify, and it's not just with slaves, the Bible is fine with punishing people with beatings with the rod, as well as children. Spare the rod, spoil the child. So it's not.
You're making this God more monstrous than I'm trying to. Okay? I just want to just leave the monstrousness in one category. Okay. So yes, but ultimately, when you find your passage, that's the answer. There are, in fact, regulations about how much beating a master could give their slave. It was not a matter of, if the slave just thinks they're being mistreated, they can just leave. That would be incorrect. And if you believe that that's what the Bible says, I think that you've got a little bit more study to do.
Well, it's on the runaway slave section, which
I'm letting for you. You have as much time as you want, but I'm going to pass it over to Chase to ask his question, and you can come back to that.
Okay.
So, Teddi, I do have a question for you.
Yes.
Well, actually, this question may be for both. Actually, it's a little for both of you, and coming from both of your opening statements. So, in regards to rules and regulations from or even moral guidelines from the Bible, are you taking the words of people who are you taking the words of God or just different passages where people feel they have an opinion through a situation in the Bible?
What do
Well,
you mean by that? I need
No,
clarification on,
no, it's fine.
on the question.
So
What do you mean by people's opinion or whatever?
So and a lot of times, like earlier when you were mentioning things that Paul was saying, and then also Teddy was mentioning, she has passages where other people make statements against certain opinions in the Bible. I've noticed a hard hold to what people like Paul and such will say, and not so much and that is used as a rebuttal to what we're saying are what God himself, the person you believe in, is literally telling you to do, or the rules that he has laid out for you. So I'm curious.
So what you're trying to say? Let me see if I got this right, because I don't want to misrepresent. So you're saying that there's people like that are writing in the New Testament, and Paul says one thing, but the law may say this. Kind of like that, right?
In a sense, yes. So,
well, as a Christian, we believe that the entire word is inspired, right? So, like, we believe that Paul has authority there. So, Paul is an authority on those subjects when he actually speaks to them. So, as far as listening to God's commands and stuff, we listen to God because that's what we believe that the text says.
Okay, so so for you, you're more taking those words as a later interpretation or guidance from God through them.
I don't want to be properly. Well, obviously, there's okay. So in your opening statement, you talked about the continuation of the old covenant in the new, and for me, that's just a misunderstanding in the covenants, right? So Jesus, you can glean from the Old Testament certain things that apply to Israel itself, right? And that would end at a certain time, and that Jesus would fulfill the law in regards to the moral law and so forth. So he was the true revelation of what that moral trajectory was pointing to from the Old Testament.
Right.
So there's just a difference
in a sense
in theology there.
Okay, so I guess.
Am I getting to what you're trying to get?
You definitely answered my question. It's why you're right. It is a different viewpoints on theology. So for me, it would be a sense of, or for me, it'd be a take on when Jesus says that it's more of when you look at those laws, that is as far as what is the moral trajectory. He's saying this is the moral of what I guess what is utopia. This is what the rules in utopia would look like.
Yeah. He's like, okay,
so that means in utopia there will be slavery and
no.
Well,
look. Each you remember what I said, that the default is freedom, right? So like the reason God legislated slavery was for economic purposes, and that's why Israel did it, right? So they were trying to prevent poverty, and that's clearly stated. Right, and to help back on that with Teddy's idea, yes, the foreigner was voluntary. The sojourner that comes through the land, right, he had the option to sell himself into bondage to Israel. Now, as far as Christ saying, is this the ideal? No, the slavery was never the ideal. Just like he said, the divorce laws. Jesus said himself about the divorce laws. Hey, God did this because you guys' hearts are hardened. So that's kind of like.
I will say, I guess, because this is going to lead me into like a long discussion that will keep us from the first floor. So Teddy, essentially the same question to you. As far as God's law and later words said by people who in the Bible are not God, what is your take on that?
I believe that what's in the Bible is God inspired. So I'm pretty much echoing what David Russell said. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're Russell. It's okay to call you Russell because you're you David too. Okay, so you're kind of echoing Russell on this one.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. You said, "Am I what?" With Russell?
You're echoing Russell on this one. Okay,
yes.
So then I will definitely save further dig-ins for the open discussion then.
Go ahead. I don't know where David is right now, but If you want to continue with
I'm just hiding so that your pictures end up bigger while you guys are talking and I'm not.
Oh, you can also do that by clicking the button that says like what is it, the speaking window, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know how this works. I just need to know. I just need the button that I can click so that I can pick my nose.
Dude,
and
I can't do the
sees
show without that pirate look in the background, dude.
Okay.
Yeah, I love it. It gives you a sense of comfort, to be quite honest.
So, Russell, you have the right of last question.
I mean, I don't really have a question. I mean, I'm pretty much settled on the issue. I think you're wrong, David, in your conclusions here, and so does every ancient Near Eastern scholar that I've ever read, including atheist scholars such as Josh Bowen. These guys spend their lives studying the ancient Near Eastern cultures, and their idea of slavery, and they'll well admit to you this, that is not the type of slavery unique to the antebellum South. The European slave trade is unique, and so is Islamic slave trade.
Okay, I keep hearing that it's unique. I don't
yes.
hear how it's unique though. So it's not enough to just say it's unique.
You're going to have to do your homework.
Oh,
I've given you a name. I've given you a name to look
Well,
up. I've
you
given
mean
you
to tell me
sources.
that your argument for uniqueness is I've given you a name and you should research it?
Oh, no,
Just tell me how it's unique.
I will.
Great. Well, somebody should.
Yeah, I would like to, because we've
I-
laid out how it's the same, but we
but
haven't seen how
I'm
it's
telling
different.
you- I'm telling you that I've given you sources and in my opening argument.
Okay,
and stuff.
I'll come
And you
get
guys
back to you in
that
4
way.
years when I've gotten my degree on A&E.
interested-
What the
Are you
hell?
interested in the study? Are you interested in the study of this, or is your mind made up?
It's a
And that's
podcast of the
what-
court. My mind is made up because I've studied it. But that said,
Okay.
if you have some information that I haven't studied, I have been challenging Christians for years, to tell me how it is different in some substantive way from the slave trade that we all know and hate. And I keep getting back, well, it just is.
Okay, so then
That's not good enough.
Then let me give you a question then, since I kind of seeded my question. Okay, David, you made a comment earlier about slaves weren't kidnapped in West Africa and sold on the Dutch slave trade, right?
Yes, I made that comment.
Okay, so you're telling me these people pre-purchased slaves. They didn't auction them off at a block.
Well,
On
they
block.
were.
I mean, I
they
got a
were-
block sitting down in downtown Fredericksburg right now that I can go to and be like, "Holy crap, this is what actually happened."
They were bought and sold.
So
So when they went to Africa to take slaves, they bought them from other Africans. They bought these.
Oh,
Now
yeah.
you can
Yeah.
say, well, how did these
Yeah.
other Africans acquire
Yeah,
these people?
exactly. And
And
But it's that
I would
no
say
back-
the same way that in the Bible they acquired people to sell as well. So I'm not entirely
that's
sure how you see that as a
the
difference.
ancient Near East, but that's
No,
that's
no,
an
no.
with the ancient Near East. They didn't do that.
you said that's a what?
Sojourners and foreigners sold themselves into slavery.
I would have to strongly disagree with that because they're even. I mean, as far as like a direct story, the Canaanite is the most direct example you can see, where they're literally after a war directed to take people in, women and children, as your
Yeah,
own.
yeah.
And so
And there's also-
I don't see how we can be mistaken that for them being bought or
Because they're war
acquired
criminals.
for the women because of how they were going to be acquired as either wives of themselves and taken forcibly or sex slaves, and the children were men. I'm sure we can easily make that assumption that they were going to be servants of some kind, probably not willingly. We can easily see that a good majority of them will like to be served, so you have to just watch them kill your family.
Even
agree.
the slavery in Deuteronomy. Okay,
But let me answer
just very
that,
quickly,
just one at
even
a
the
time.
slavery in Deuteronomy, there's a difference in language, and you can just read it as the passages transition to the different types of slavery. Part of the language is you can buy your slaves, and that's language from Jews and Gentile slaves, to you can sell your self into slavery. Those are two different things. What the foreigner could not do was buy a Jew in the same way that a Jew could buy a foreigner. These were different kinds of things. And throughout that passage of Deuteronomy, you can start at
Actually,
verse
the
30.
foreigner
You can start.
could buy a Jew.
You could. Sorry, you could
Yeah,
start
not
with
the
verse.
same way you said, Teddy.
Right. You can start with verse 39 for those out there who have Bibles and actually want to crack them open. You can start I'm sorry, I said Deuteronomy. Leviticus 25, verse 39. And you just read through that. It's all very simple language, even in the King James Version. Doesn't matter what version you're using. You can see where some of the language is, you can take your slaves from here, you can buy your slaves from here, and the others are more of a business arrangement. You can sell yourself for a period of time and be freed from Jubilee. I don't want to take the time to read that whole passage because it's quite a lot of it, but it's very clear.
How am I going to answer his question? Hold on.
You could get.
I got two questions now to answer, right? So, what was your question again, Chase? Because I got
it was more of a comment into what you're saying. I was saying
you're talking about war criminals. You're talking about war. Yeah.
The Canaan example is a direct example of. So as of right now, up to this point, we've been kind of every time we are getting to what we're talking about, we keep being brought the example of what's I would say indentured servitude, if you keep compared to it, but we are talking about in cases where this is literally directed to follow what we now know as antebellum slavery in the South. A direct relation of how you acquire the slaves and what is to happen to them afterwards.
Okay.
So in Africa, they took care of the war part for them, and now we're just at the purchasing portion of it.
Okay, so as far as war criminals in the Canaan times, okay, there were
who were you saying were war criminals?
They were prisoners of war. They were the people that they took into forced servitude were like war criminals.
I would have loved to have seen what their
crimes.
They were prisoners of war. They
were prisoners of war, but that doesn't mean war criminals. You understand there's a difference between a war crime.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just. That's my fault. Okay, prisoners of war. Sorry.
Their crimes were idolatry and burning.
Wait a minute. The girls that were too young to have had sex, they had crimes?
Oh no. Oh,
what the hell?
We'll get
David, Russell, go back to what you were saying.
Sorry. Backstory with the virgin.
Hey, Teddy. Let me answer these two questions first, real quick. Okay. As far as I'm not going to use war criminals, my bad. All right. Prisoners of war. Okay.
I am fine with prisoners of war over war criminals. For sure.
Actually, no, I bust out the little deck of cards and start showing you the different faces. No. I'm not going to hang
you over that.
Yeah, they were prisoners of war, and there were different treatment for prisoners of war in that regard, absolutely. And there's reasons for it, and they had their reasons for it, and it's explained in Leviticus and what could happen if they were allowed to just go free and stuff. Also, you got to keep in mind that Israeli, they did not have a prison system. So instead of keeping them in chains all the time, they moved them into their houses, and they worked. And it's kind of like what the serfs were to the king. And you can see that all throughout the ancient Near East, and that's how they did it all throughout the ancient Near East. Again, a great book to read on ancient Near Eastern law is that the history of the ancient Near Eastern law, which, like I said, was comprised with 22 scholars. It's a 2-volume set, and they go through every legal document that has ever been found on the ancient Near East. It's an amazing read. It's an amazing read, and you'll learn a lot, especially on slavery, because they have a whole section on it. And you'll see that there's a fine difference between antebellum slavery versus that.
David, you have an argument that you can just give rather than just saying there's a difference and read this book. I'm on a podcast. I can't stop and read the book. So can you please?
How about I give you a laundry list? How about a laundry list?
We're talking about Israel's law, and you guys are telling us that there are a lot of Eastern law. That's great, but we are actually looking at the law of which they have followed in the
Chase, ancient Near East. The ancient Near East covers Israel. Okay. The ancient Near East, the A&E culture, that covers Israel as well.
So now my question, because I haven't read this other book. Is it saying that these laws are differing from what are in the Bible?
No, they
No,
don't.
they're
Okay,
not.
so reading the Bible should be
reading
enough
the
for
Bible
this, right?
is enough.
But
So
the
here-
cultures also surrounding them, the cultures that also
No,
surround.
but we
That's
understand
what I
that Israel's goal was to change those cultures to their culture for one, through way of conquest, which was their God, which was the directive given to them by their God. So it's the right assumption to know that these neighboring places were going to be under that law that is in the Bible. Just because they have different laws, that's why they're being hunted by the Israelites in the first place, or being sought out by that nation in the first place, because they practice different law. So if they practice different law, that means it was the wrong law, not God's law. We are talking about the law that you guys are arguing for, God's law, which is in the Bible.
Well, I'm also including the practices that went on in the ancient world.
But that would still be considered wrong.
And
You're not advocating for wrong practices. You're advocating
I'm
for
not
specific right practices,
differentiating
right?
whether one thing's right or wrong. What I'm saying is that all cultures at that time dealt with these issues, and that's all.
I've read the Bible. I haven't read the book that you're referring to.
Properly handle slavery, which means he advocates for slavery, which is in this book that we're talking about. You're telling me other books. You're telling me other books talk about other nations' law. That is great that they have other nations that deal with slavery, but your God was basically giving you the question, and this is his answer.
Well, God definitely wasn't the idea. It wasn't the idea, but he legislated it.
Well,
Right?
I
It
would
doesn't-
say.
But now,
So if that's the case, then why didn't he just say don't own other humans? When you were met with foreigners, greet them with open arms and lovingly. Make them literally one of your own, and do not own them whatsoever. If they need property, give them property. Essentially, like this whole system could have been done without having to be with a man within an inch of his life and it being okay, or trying to trick another man into staying with him because now you own his family because he inadvertently had a family through the slave master's daughter.
But
These are things that are in the Bible. These are rules that are in the Bible that God laid out himself.
Chase, you're looking at you're judging a culture that existed over 4,000 years ago, thinking that they could just uproot everything that's been taught to them.
Why not? They couldn't.
God regularly did that with his laws, regularly, and
All
they
the
regularly did not follow them. So I understand your argument that they just didn't follow his law, but he gave a law and they followed it.
God deals with culture in their time and in their context.
You can tell
So is that why he told them not to eat seafood?
Sure, you can tell them not to eat seafood in certain colors, but you can't tell them not to own a human being.
Like I said, you could.
And also, your God is also not strong enough or strong-willed enough to make that statement on people's culture.
You're trying again. It's like trying to put a baby behind the wheel of a car. His civilization wasn't there yet. God dealt with the culture.
Which one was the greater moral issue to deal with? Eating shellfish or ending slavery?
okay,
Go ahead, Teddy.
Forgetting this is a mutually beneficial.
This is Teddy's question, by the way. So you've been out of this for a
I
minute.
know, right?
I would like to hear your point, Teddy.
This is what the people pay for. Come on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay. Let the bear come in now here.
yeah,
Well,
Teddy,
bears
you
don't
had a
ask.
laundry
Don't
list.
ask.
You had a laundry
All right.
list. Just give me
You
one.
ready for the laundry? I'm going to give you more than
Give me your,
one,
no,
David.
please,
I-
Teddy, give me
any
your
one.
best- Give me your best one.
All
I
right.
would love your best.
First of all, kidnapping, the source of the humans that were being used in servitude. Kidnapping. We all know that the Africans that were brought to America were kidnapped.
I'm sorry. Are you
Right?
denying the history that Africans sold Africans to Europeans? Are you denying that history?
Yeah.
Because this is easy history to look up. If you're saying that didn't happen, I would just say you could stop talking right now
Okay,
because
but
you don't
you
know
know
what the
what?
hell you're talking about.
No, I am well aware that they were selling
Great. Next
them
point.
to the Americans. But wait.
You just counted your own point by answering that
David,
question.
okay, wait a minute.
You
David,
counted your own first point by answering that question.
no, I did not. No, I didn't. Listen,
Because you said that
David,
they
if
were only
I-
victims.
no, wait, stop. Wait. If I kidnap someone and then I sell him to you, do you think that person, just because you bought him, that he's still not kidnapped? Of course he is.
Well, look,
Of course he
I don't
is.
know where the chain begins, but I asked the same question about the slaves that the Jews bought. How did those slaves end up on the market for buying? Now, one of the ways we saw Jews acquiring slaves and people becoming slaves in the A&E is through war and being captured, dare I say, kidnapped. Now we move it one down and someone buys them, and we enter God's law. Now you can buy your slaves from foreigners.
But that's because there are 3 different types of situations.
You can't buy Jews. Jews can't buy Jews.
Only Jews could be. It was an optional decision.
Buy your male and female slaves from the foreigners.
Upon them. And actually, you could make a Jew be forever a slave. I can actually pull up the verses that there was the process for that.
No, you can't make them. That is where a Jew chooses to become a slave.
I'm curious. You had a laundry list, Teddy, and your first piece of laundry is still dirty.
Y'all don't let me finish. Okay,
well, give me one that's not so easily refuted. Okay.
All right. Rape, brutal beatings, people being targeted because of their race. The master. No, we're talking.
Wait. Go back to rape. Go back to rape. Go back to rape.
We're talking. Let's talk about what was going on, because you asked for a distinction.
Right. Sometimes female slaves were used as sexual partners for white owners. You realize that was true in the Bible, right? In fact, it was legislated in the Bible. You want me to read? You want me to read to you?
Wait, what now?
Here, let me help you.
What are you saying? No. What are you claiming?
What am I claiming? I'm claiming that women who were bought as slaves were used for sex in the Bible. That's what I'm claiming. Would you like me to read to you?
Well, I'm familiar with.
Are you?
Okay, look.
Well, then are you saying that's not right?
Okay, there were
Teddi,
in biblical. Hold on. Listen, hold on. In biblical times, there were arranged marriages.
Okay, we're not talking about arranged marriages. Let me just read real quick. I've got it queued up here. If a man sells his whoa, this is not arranged marriage. Listen. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, slave, Eved, whatever you want to, let's say Eved. She is not to go. Hold on. She is not to go free as male servants do. So that's the first thing. She's not going free.
That's because when
if she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her. This is very progressive, by the way. He has no right to sell her to foreigner because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. You see, now I can buy my son a wife. Is this a one man, one woman for life kind of life? Hang on. He must not deprive the wait a minute. If he marries another woman, so it's not like this is a proper wife. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of food, clothing, and marital rights. And if he does not provide her with these things, she is free to go, and no one has to try to pay for her freedom, that sort of thing. So this is probably one of the most progressive passages in the Bible on slavery. And for female slaves, they were used as wives for the person who bought them, or wives for their sons. They were sex slaves. That's what they were. And you can call them wives. It's fine if you want to call them wives and daughters-in-law.
And they
were purchased for life as sex partners.
By the man. And to please the man, and as in any so in those times, we definitely know that a woman's goal, her directive, whatever word you want to use there, was, especially in that situation, because they also talk about it, is to ultimately please the husband. And if he does, if she is unsuccessful in that, that is also grounds for how you can get rid of her.
And
That is the only case.
Doesn't even need a proper
What
divorce.
source do you have for that? Chase, what source do you have that? What?
That's it. That's in the Bible. So give me one.
Wouldn't that be a brilliant way for a woman
It's in the Bible.
who's that? Now, okay, let's back up.
If you
First
could
of all,
give me a
the
source that
woman
says that
did
they
not
have to please the
have
man and stuff like that.
Yes.
Well, we just
daughter
read from
did not
from
have
here.
agency in which to sell herself. Okay, so it would be her.
Just real quick, Teddy.
who is
Exodus
doing
chapter
that.
21, verse 7. You can read there and see what the words say for yourself. Anyone following along?
You found that already?
Just tell me what it refers to,
Ex-
because I'm familiar with all these passages.
Well, apparently
At least
not.
just about.
You were.
If y'all would let me get a word in, I'll tell you.
Oh, Teddy, I'm
The
going to let you
thought-
get so many more words in because they are so entertaining. You were trying to give me a list of ways that antebellum slavery was different from biblical slavery, and you brought up rape.
Okay.
And I'm just
you know
telling
what?
you, if you're
can
talking
see
about using female slaves for sex, that is
No,
what the
I
female
said
slaves
rape.
were for
Okay.
in the Bible. Give me another differentiator.
Okay, no. Let's first deal with this one because with rape, we all know that in the antebellum South and with lots of slaves in whatever form they take, lots of times the masters would rape the women.
What do you mean rape the women? They were just treating them like wives.
No. Oh, wait a minute.
They were just they were like
Are
wives.
you telling me? And you tell me which slave owner in the antebellum South married his slave that he.
Well,
that he
these
was
people
having
didn't
sex
marry
with.
their slaves either. They just treated
Yes,
them.
they
Treated
did.
them
No,
like
no,
waves
no.
in that they
You
were
are-
involuntary
you are
sex
Oh,
partners.
absolutely.
Russell?
No. You are absolutely 100% incorrect.
I'm just
Even
reading
with
I'm just reading the
prisoners
Bible,
of
and I don't
war.
think that you're making your point. Maybe you've got another way to differentiate.
I will tell you. No. I will tell you. With even the females that were prisoners of war. So when the Israelites would go and capture their prisoners of war, and
yes,
and
take
a lot
the
of times
girls
they
who were
would
too
end
young
up-
to have had
So-
sex. Yeah, I
but
get it.
wait a minute.
And make them
So
wives, shave their hair.
Talk about
Got it.
Let's talk about those virgins. David.
Numbers
I'm sure
31.
You want to get to that, where it talked about how
This
they
was not in my
killed
write-up. I didn't
or-
really want to
or-
get
or
to
they-
it, but sure. Numbers
or
31 for you
they
people
Wait,
following
captured-
along.
before we get into that, I would like to answer Russell's question about where it talks about the women only being freed if the man is not pleased. That would be Deuteronomy 21, starting at verse 10. And this is actually it's actually leading us back to prisoners of war as well. When you go to war against your enemies and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands and you take captives, if you notice among the captives beautiful women and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Bring her into your home and have her shave her head, trim her nails, put aside the clothes she was wearing when captured. After she was living in your house and mourned her father and mother for a full month, so at least they gave her a month to get over it. Then you'll go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. So essentially,
husband.
so this has to be the intention of the man, which he was already planning to do in the first place. So this has everything to do with a prisoner of war situation anyway.
But he
This
can't
is-
just rape her.
And
He can't just
yes,
have
yes,
sex
he
with her.
can.
has to
So
marry her
if
and
you
then-
are not
No.
pleased with her,
You
let
can
her
you can
go.
Wait a minute.
If you are
Mosaic
not
law-
pleased with her, hold on. First of all, this has nothing. I'm actually simply stating. I was actually simply answering today's question on where if a man, the only situation in which a woman can be let go is if she's not pleased. If a man's not pleased with her, this is that passage. If you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she wishes, which is nice. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since you have dishonored her. Which means that since we know an honor in that case means she's no longer a virgin. There's nothing because they will take her at that point.
Right, and you can no longer treat her as a slave because guess what? She was a slave. This is sex slavery. This is what we call. This is how we define sex slavery.
Get rid of her. We were now none pleased with her. Not because she's living her time. She was just, I'm done.
Look,
No, she was taken as a captor and used as a wife.
Okay,
Let's be very clear about that. And by the way,
and that's the only.
Hey, why don't we give Teddy a chance to respond? Let's give Teddy a full chance to respond without interrupting.
Sure, she can respond when she stops saying clearly false things. Go ahead, Teddy.
No, it is not false.
Dave,
even
you gotta give it to her even if she is false, so that way you can counter it instead of like, looking like a bully. Then you can counter it.
We do have to at least let her flesh some of these out so we can have something.
What? Okay, so now let's.
You're going to try to stop a man with an eye patch?
It is. Are you going to stop a bear? Teddy the bear?
Go ahead, Fozzie. What do you got?
All right. Ain't no Fozzie. So anyway, as Chase mentioned, it talks about taking her as a wife. They cannot, because lest we forget, fornication is not exactly permitted under Mosaic law. In fact, it's a death penalty offense, right? So
what do you mean by fornication?
Having sex outside of marriage.
How many marriages could you have?
He has to marry her. Even a concubine has legal rights. Okay, so that would elevate a servant, slave, whatever you want to call them. If they become a wife, they have the same rights as a typical Israelite, a native-born Israelite wife. And so that.
How many wives could a person have under this type of rule? Now, how many?
God does not really think highly of polygamy, and everywhere there's polygamy in the Bible, it doesn't end well because it does not conform to the ideal of one man, one woman.
You are aware that women have different rights,
so
and
can
especially
they have more than one? Yeah, technically.
Okay, so I'm just trying to make a very quick point here as you're trying to sugarcoat this thing. Men could call as many of these slaves wives as they wanted to. They could use them, and then when they're not pleased with them, discard them. And you can say that that's marriage all you like.
Free.
Right.
Free.
So you can buy them or capture them, use them, and then get rid of them.
So
that is codified in these passages that we're talking about, and you are somehow trying to defend this as a moral thing. This is not what we call wives in our culture. And if this is what they called wives in their culture, and this is what God considered to as wives, God is a bigger fuck up than I thought he was.
This is a culture where arranged marriages was permitted.
That's not an arranged marriage. That's buying a slave.
Why is God not stronger than a culture?
It is.
Why is God not stronger than a culture? The God you believe is easily able to give directive on things and change whole cultures, but on this one topic, he seems pretty hell-bent on staying in their culture and not uprooting it, all while he has
I'm going to step out for just a second, Russell.
Rules
right.
to uproot a person's culture, any person's culture, especially theirs, considering they were jumping from culture to culture all the time.
Nasty things happen when people have free will. And
you know what? I have a question for you. So, do you believe there's free will? You believe in heaven, right?
Yes.
You believe there's free will in heaven, right?
I don't know if there is free will in heaven. I don't know that the Bible speaks of what the situation is with regard to our having free will in terms of in heaven. So I have no idea. So
do you think we
Hey, for all who are listening, we are now off topic.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We have fallen off topic.
No, it's good. Go ahead. It's a good icebreaker.
So do you believe that in heaven? So I mean, do you have ideas, or do you believe in heaven but just as just a place and that's it, or do you believe there are actual properties and things going on in heaven, at least as far as right now in your belief of it?
When you say properties, do you mean just are we reunited with our loved ones and seeing God? And
well, so I mean, so it sounds like you have this idea, like you're going to this place where you get to see all these people you love and cherish and do things you love and cherish, correct?
I mean, I don't know the details of heaven. I know that it's supposed to be an awesome reward.
Just give your thought there, Chase.
So
your punchline.
Right. No, it's fine. So I mean, well, so in all these cases, we are talking about a person who gives overall moral directive to the people that he is over. And in heaven, and in a lot of these cases, you're saying, well, he couldn't do things here because of free will. He couldn't change a lot of things because of the free will of these people. One, I don't see that as being a problem as to why he still couldn't give the law and for people to follow in the first place. Because he does that. He gave laws, but he did not tell us not to own people. On this subject that we're talking about, he most definitely did not. So which leads me to believe that if I went to heaven, I can possibly see slavery up there if that was a real place. Because if there is free will in heaven and slavery is not a bad thing, it's not a sin in any way, shape, or form that I'm seeing from the Bible, from the rules itself, any of that. In the right circumstances, the person so chooses the free will to do so in heaven. If we're just going to assume there's free will in heaven, at least at this point, there's going to be slavery in heaven, and if that person gets is unpleased with him, he can beat him with an inch of his life in heaven, whatever that may look like. And then, as long as he doesn't die or maim him or take his eye or whatever, God's fine with it. So heaven really doesn't sound like much of this utopia. It sounds like a place where, these are the blueprints God has here, and what He had for ideally a perfect place, and He's trying to work His way for that. This perfect place doesn't sound very great in any sense.
Okay, but here's the thing, Chase. We are God's servant. We are God's Aved.
So we can be with an inch of my life as long as I'm not maimed or dead.
No. Whether you
want
to call him, whether you want to refer to it as a servant or slave, we are God's servant.
Okay, right. So then all those rules apply.
So when we go to heaven,
and the rules for you also apply. If a man wants to buy a woman, or any other woman in heaven, they have the right to do so, because we can even there are plenty of, especially
we're not even married. We're not even considered really married and stuff like that. It seems like I've read that somewhere in heaven. That we're all just kind of.
I was going to say if there's free will, you'd be able to get married if you said
hanging out.
Okay.
But back to the whole thing.
Who needs marriage when you can just buy a woman?
Buying a okay, let's get back to this whole misconception about buying a woman. These are arranged marriages. The woman does not have agency.
Do you agree with that, Russell? In your reading of A&E, is buying slaves the same as arranged marriage?
No.
You're conflating two different things. That is not this. Okay, listen. With the females are treated differently than the males, okay? With the females, that has to be done through the father, and presumably the father, and that's only going to be if they are so impoverished, because remember, God commands the Israelites to for example, leave the corners of, where they're farming, leave that available for the
Teddi,
poor.
you realize that today in many parts of the world, fathers sell their daughters because they're impoverished. We would consider that a criminal act. You are defending this as an act of a just God.
I
sell my property to take money, not people.
Say, hey, have arranged marriages. Now, arranged marriages, that's a whole other topic.
When a man sells his daughter as a slave today, he is I'm sure they call it arranged marriages. People, you go to India,
She's
people are
not
selling their
being
daughters
sold.
right now.
But David, the differentiation is we have to learn what they meant back then, and we can't judge it with our modern.
Okay, so
All I'm saying is it's wrong. It's wrong if we do it today, and Teddy is saying that it's okay then.
There is wrong.
No, yeah. So let's.
There is wrong things that we do. Yeah. Yeah.
What's happening?
We can see that. We can see that marriage.
Do you understand? Do you understand?
Binding
Do you
contract
understand
between a man and a woman, and that contract only says that this man now owns this woman. That's all that binding contract is saying. And with this contract,
you understand, as I stated earlier, you do understand that terms like property and stuff.
That is property.
They take
what is ownership?
No, they take. No, it's not in Israel, not in the biblical language.
Because he says,
look at
because he says you can sell them like if you can pass a person down like a house, that is the same equivalence of property.
No, it's not. Dude, it's not like that. And that's what I'm saying. It says you may.
You
is the default.
Right,
like
so
I told you.
You don't have to pass down your house.
Look.
Did you have to pass down your wife?
Did you listen to my opening where I said we're talking about the foreigner and stuff, right? It says you may do these things, you may not. It's not the ideal, right?
He never says these are not the ideal. Saying you may is
that whole
these are actions.
Not the ideal.
These are actions that if I'm gonna assume and how one is gonna give this directive. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But you get the directive earlier in Leviticus. In Leviticus,
and it didn't start with owning people. It started with how you should own people.
No, not in Leviticus 19. It did not.
What is Leviticus? I don't have Leviticus 19 pulled up in front of me to know exactly what it says offhand. Sorry.
It teaches you how to treat the foreigner in the land. We're talking about a system that comes in on hard times. It comes in economic, and they volunteer.
Right, and you're telling, but then you keep telling me that your God is so weak-willed that he can't tell people not to own people.
He's not in favor.
Just from David's point that it's not property and ownership. I just want a clarification. So maybe you were right, David, but when I read these words, I don't get that. It says you may also buy. Well, let me just read the previous verse so there's no question about that. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you, and then from them you may buy slaves. And it says you may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you, and members of their clans born in your country. So there's three different categories of foreigners. And it says, and they will, not may, will become your property. And those are the direct words. I'm not sure which translation this is. I think it's the NIV.
Yeah, and you got to get into the Hebrew for property. Those
you can bequeath them to put to your children
now is what you're telling
as inherited property. And so again, the second time you can bequeath them for inherited property. So this is I'm just asking for a clarification, Eric, because if there's something that is very academic about this that I'm missing, I know that you're going to school and you're studying some of this stuff, and I yield to your insight on what this might mean other than what it seems to obviously say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the case. And Chase, this answers your question too. That's the case whenever you read a document that's thousands and thousands of years old, right? You have to understand it in the context in which they wrote it, right? So, I mean, it's easy for us to put these type of spins on them, right? Because of what we've experienced.
Right, but just tell me what it does mean.
So I mean, I can definitely cover this. I haven't put a spin on anything as of yet for context. I've actually sat with you guys and stayed in the times and in the context of the writing. So I don't see where this is where that is valid here. So
what have you stayed in context on? That's what I.
So we've been talking about the slave. Yeah, we've been reading literally the past perspective and even what those ownerships even mean.
And you told Teddy that she has that we're trusting a mistranslation. No, we're actually not. What we're actually trusting is the original language.
Well, tell me what it means.
What I'm doing, and I'm getting there, David. I'm getting there. I promise.
Speak some Hebrew to me.
According to scholars of this time, property, it gives an anthropologist pause, right? So, as far as property goes, it's, and I can't, let me see if my notes here have it in my opening.
I know there's some other in the Hebrew. It doesn't read quite. I mean, what the problem when you get into translations, not just from one language to the other, but then you have all these different bot versions
Teddy,
of
are
the
you
Bible
fluent in Hebrew?
that get fast and loose.
Are you fluent in Hebrew, Teddy?
I am not, but I've looked up certain words and read where.
Okay, but you're pretty fluent in English, right?
I would say so.
All right. So when you read a Bible, you read the English Bible, not the Hebrew Bible. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. So assuming that you would recommend we read the same Bible as you, I'm not entirely sure what argument you are making that it's so much different in the Hebrew. It must be clear enough in an English Bible, or else it's no good.
No, I'm telling you, there are certain.
You use the English Bible because you're not fluent in Hebrew. Same with me.
When we get,
we're now talking about is just a vast.
But no. When we get to certain passages, I mean, one really cannot deny this. Sometimes you don't need words to just be super precise to convey information.
Right.
And so sometimes in these
I'm just waiting for our resident scholar to tell us what it means that you will become property, and that you can pass that property on to your kids.
Property in the Israeli notion of property in the law was severely restricted to economic output only, all right, not ownership of a disposable good. So their ownership was their services, not the person themselves. That's why they gave stuff called like quit rent. You even know that about quit rent, right? No. It was basically what a person could give their slave. I don't know if y'all play Xbox, but V-Bucks, right? It's like fake money, right?
I'm familiar with those, but I don't play.
So basically, the slave would, give this for his services. He would give this. It's like an economic transaction. He would give these quit rents to the owner. And once he had paid that owner with enough of his services, he was no longer obligated to work for him in any capacity, right? However, he was still bound to that family, right, as a servant, and he would serve in other ways. So that's what a quit rent would do. So I mean, these people had rights.
What does it mean that they were bound to that family, but not a servant?
It sounds like take turns on task and not so much slave. Like you don't get freed of your duty as a slave. It sounds like you just, for this period of a month or year, however long, you're tasked with being a store owner or a maid or whatever.
Here's the thing, but here's the thing: is they tied themselves together.
Task you something else.
Chase, they would. No. This would be their work, their economic worth, because a lot of them were tradesmen, scholars, stuff like that, right? So what would happen is, because they were still tied to this family, okay, they would be allowed to start another business.
Okay, so I'm just having trouble with the language here. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property. Are they saying you can inherit their service, or I don't understand.
You can inherit their servitude. Absolutely.
And it's mandatory. So could they say no?
No, it's not mandatory. It's not mandatory.
If it's a sojourner. If it's a foreigner.
So where do we have evidence of them being able to deny service rightfully and being rightfully done?
Yeah, I don't see that. I haven't seen that.
I'm here for it. I just
the evidence. Okay, so if you look back and you look. Yeah, but if you look, you got to remember, depending on the foreigner. Okay, so
I got my Bible right here. Just tell me where to look. I'll look it up.
The economic situation in Israel at this time. You're a foreigner. You probably believed in other gods. It's one of the reasons they couldn't own lands is because they're pagan, right? So that had something to do with it. Israel did have class issues with stuff like that. The ones that converted, like Teddy said, would be given Hebrew status, and they would experience the same laws of Hebrew. Otherwise, they'd have to follow in the law of the foreigners, as far as the
Right.
laws that proceeded before Leviticus 25:47.
And the only
47.
distinction was the
And that's
issue of
in the
land and Jubilee and the
I mean,
6
it
years.
sounded to me like you could be free in Israel up until Israel wanted you. Like as a foreigner, something you could be free in Israel up until Israel wanted you.
Well, I couldn't hear you, Chase.
It sounds
say
like as a foreigner in Israel, like let's just say, like in this situation, like I'm the foreigner who has my freedom in Israel. It sounds like that's only going to last up until the next Israelite wants me.
No. Let's.
Because he said you could just pick them from among you.
No.
And I'm sure, like what ways
Chase,
maybe have like a certain age.
Chase,
or
there
But
is
that's
a Bible
exactly by the
passage.
language.
Hey, Chase.
Oh, wait a minute.
there
Teddy's
is a
about to
Bible-
give us a Bible passage. That would be unique.
Oh, well, I gotta
Alright,
what you got?
find it first. There are like
I
10
would like to
million
hear it.
Bible passages dealing with this. But there is a Bible passage that talks specifically about foreigners owning Israelites,
But I'm
native
talking about
born
being. I'm
Jewish
talking about.
Israelites.
That's not what I'm
They
talking
can
about.
be
I can read.
wealthy.
I can read
They
that
can
for
be
you, Teddy.
wealthy.
I can read
You
that
got
for you.
that in
If a
front of you?
foreigner,
Okay.
let me read it for you, Teddy. Because I've got it here. I know that you.
And it's
bring-
got the whole thing about redemption, where
Yeah,
God wants
right.
to encourage other Jews to redeem the Jew that's in servitude.
It has nothing to do with
to the
for foreigners. You're talking
Right.
about
So
people
the
who are-
foreigners owning Jews had to basically obey the laws of Jews owning Jews. But Jews owning foreigners, that was a different law. I mean, I can read it for you if you like, Teddy, but it's not going to help your case.
My point is it absolutely proves my point to Chase that it's not like foreigners are in danger of becoming snatched up as slaves, because that would be
Yes, yes.
Literally is the situation.
Okay,
Jews are. You're right. Jews are not in danger of being snatched up by foreigners to become slaves, but
Okay, look,
foreigners are in
here's-
danger of being snatched up by Jews.
no,
They can't be
no,
snatched up. They
are
have
not.
to. They
Okay.
volunteer their services. They
Okay,
have to do
so
that.
what-
They
this is-
are not.
This is what Chase is talking about, and so
I just
Okay,
want to-
There
all
are
right, let's
laws.
let David talk.
this is what Chase is talking about. I'm here to provide the Bible for the things you guys are saying, if I can find it. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. That's one. From them you may buy slaves, and then it says you may also buy some of the temporary residents. You were talking about some of the temporary residents, David. You can buy slaves from the temporary residents living among you, and members of their clans, both in your country, and they will become your property. So these are the various places and ways that a person hanging about Israel could become a slave. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of protection there, but if I may,
the bear needs to come in.
let me just read one more passage, because again, I like to bring in the Bible whenever talking about the Christian God. It is referring to something that you were saying earlier in your opening statement, Teddy, about, and it's been referred to throughout this podcast, about snatching people, kidnapping people.
I'm about to give you the passage.
If someone is caught kidnapping a fellow Israelite, now there's other passages that talk about this, and they don't have this particular detail. This is Deuteronomy 24. 7. If someone is caught kidnapping a fellow Israelite and treating or selling them as a slave, the kidnapper must die. Okay, so you were saying this is kind of a generic rule, and this seems to apply to kidnapping Israelites. This feeds into the two separate rules that God had.
Okay.
For Jews,
wait.
it was okay to have a kind of indentured servitude for a temporary period of time. For foreigners, it was okay to take them and treat them as slaves. In the earlier passage that we were reading, it ends one of those readings with these words. I just want to use the exact words so that people get it. Okay, it says you can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. Now, no one's even talking about ruthless ruling until this passage says that you can't rule ruthlessly over the Israelites, indicating that you could rule ruthlessly over foreigners. And so there are two sets of ideas here that are at play.
Because you can
that's not
hit
true, David. Hold on.
you can hit the
Well,
foreigner
do you want me to read it
with
again?
the-
I don't read
David.
well. Maybe
Hold
you
on.
can read it.
foreigner with the rod.
Just a second,
Okay?
Teddy.
So
David,
that would be
Russell
seen as
needs
being
to spank me.
ruthless.
Go ahead, Russell.
So Russell, go ahead, Russell. Actually, go ahead.
Go ahead, Russell.
All right, guys. So there's a lot to be said on this chapter. It's like I told you, it's one of the ones I wrestled with as well. But you have to take it in the backdrop of what is already deemed as what is already slavery according to Leviticus, and then you also got to treat the foreigner like you treat your neighbor. It says, and all this in the law here at Leviticus 25 parallels. You have to parallel it with the previous context. Okay, the previous laws regarding foreigners, such as Leviticus 19:33, which says, "When a foreigner lives with you in your land, you must not oppress him. You must regard the foreigner who lives with you as native born among you. You are to love him as yourself, for you are foreigners in the land of Egypt." See, there's a tie in here that you guys aren't getting. You have to be able to read the entirety of it. You can't cherry pick the verses, and that's what you're doing. And I hate it, but that's the case. I'm trying to, we're trying to lay some groundwork for it.
You're just skipping over the verses that don't look good, and you're not giving me any way to understanding them.
But I just told you how it relates. That you have to understand.
Well, how does it
a verse
relate?
that comes before. You have to understand a verse that comes before.
I've read the whole thing. I
things.
promise. Unlike most of the Christians in this audience, I've read all of Leviticus.
And so,
You read
multiple
the
times.
wrong one,
and
David.
if that's the case, it sounds like that. Okay, so Russell, I'll roll with you. If that's the case, then maybe I'm not so much in danger as a foreigner. It just means that if I fuck up, then I'm in danger, because essentially, like that's my issue with. I mean, a lot of the other understandings that just because it tells you how to treat people in between bad happenings, how to treat people when that bad happening arises. It has a specific directive on how to handle it. So essentially, me as a foreigner, all I have to do is mess up living in these Israelite countries, and that's ground to them as a slave because I owe them something.
I'm going to give you the floor, Teddy, but
even with other things, you can now take that.
Where did you get that? If they mess up, it says do not oppress them, and they have to treat them like yourself. So if you're treating them like themselves, they have to treat them as Hebrews under the law.
If a Hebrew owes another Hebrew something, he's unable to pay their debt. That Hebrew is now obligated to now fulfill that debt. He's able to take me as a slave by right of law. That is not treating anybody wrong.
No, I mean,
that is treating him as the brother next to you. That is the law.
Okay, we need to add.
And it's all voluntary, right?
So, Teddy, I'm gonna give the floor to Teddy here for a moment.
Now I have to go to court and die, possibly, if I keep objecting to it.
I'm going to give the floor to Teddy here for a moment.
Yes, I'm sorry.
But I won't. But looking at the clock, looking at the clock, I've already let this farce go on too long.
We're granting any time, David.
Because you're not
editing video is hard. So I want to get this out today. I want people to be able to consume this. So I want you to start thinking about wrapping up, or if you have been reserving some great point for just the right time, this is the right time. Bring out your best ammunition. So we're going to go one or two more rounds of general chaos, and then we're going to wrap it up with some closing statements. So, Teddy, I am going to give you, against my better judgment, some extended time to get into whatever case you think you have been cheated out of making. And you've heard some of the objections. You have heard me say, please come up with some kind of differentiation between that slavery and chattel slavery.
Yes,
You've
I
heard
will.
you've heard all of this. I want you to start dealing with this directly. Like I said, I'm going to give you, maybe as much as 10 minutes of unbroken time, so that you don't go whining about being cheated out of time. so here you go. And if during this time you want to ask someone a question, please wait to the end before you do that, because I don't want another Q&A to eat into your time to finish making your case. This is mostly your case. So you may have the floor again.
All right. So what I have been trying to get across to everybody, and I've got the passages right in front of me. I had talked about the runaway slave passage. That's Deuteronomy 23, 15 through 16. And it says, "You shall not give back to his master the slave who has escaped from his master to you. He may dwell with you in your midst in the place which he chooses, within one of your gates, where it seems best to him," the runaway slave. "You shall not oppress him." Do you hear that? You shall not oppress him. This is because if the rationale, okay, no, this is no longer the verse, but me just talking about it. That's because if the master is abusive or violates the rules by being harsh and ungodly to the servant can just fly the coop. And then everybody's got to treat them well. Now, so if a servant can just fly the coop, why don't they all fly the coop? Well, the reason why is because the servant wasn't snatched into servitude. The servant voluntarily wanted to get into servitude because the servant wanted to be taken care of in exchange for his labor. Because, for example, look at things today. Lots of times people are looking for work, and steady work, to support themselves, to put food on the table, to give themselves shelter and their family shelter, but they don't have the work. So when they enter into this sort of contractual relationship, then basically they've got a steady stream of work that and they get taken care of. And so that's the exchange. The master gets a steady stream of labor, and the servant gets a steady stream of being taken care of. The moment that things become oppressive or abusive, and it doesn't have to the right to rise to the level of the servant getting beaten or death, the servant can just leave, and then all of these Israelites have to give that servant safe harbor, and that servant is now basically the status of a freeman, and they can pick where they want to live. But they don't do this generally because usually it's not an oppressive situation. Now, here's the other thing, where y'all keep trying to make it sound like people are being kidnapped because of that passage that deals with getting people from foreign nations. I will handle that in just a moment. The kidnapping statute, Exodus 21:16, and that deals with he who kidnaps a man and sells him, and that's just a man, not an Israelite. The passage that you read, David, deals with an Israelite. This is just a man. And if they wanted it to be distinctly an Israelite, they would have had to have specified that, just like they specify in the other passages if it's got to be an Israelite or not. So again, he who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he's found in his hand, meaning in possession, if somebody's found in possession of a kidnapped person, shall surely be put to death. Death penalty for people who kidnap, as well as people who possess a person who has been kidnapped. So when we talk about it, when y'all bring up the passage that deals with getting slaves or servants, remember all of these words of servant and slave, it's all eved. It's all the same thing. But regardless of what you want to call it, when they're getting them from the foreign nations, all that is meant to distinguish is, one, those people won't get automatically freed after completing the 6 years, which is the typical for a native born Israelite, or within the 50 years, which is the Jubilee period. So the foreigners don't get that unless the master just wants to free the slaves or the servants. But you got to remember in those passages where it talks about acquiring the other type of servant that you don't have to let go of at 6 years, that's still a voluntary situation and a contractual agreement. Nowhere in those passages does it say you can kidnap someone, and nowhere in that passage does it say that you can be abusive or oppressive. It is a voluntary situation. And if things end up being oppressive for that foreigner, they can become a runaway slave. Then they'll get free status. But remember, free status for the foreigner in Israel means they do not own land, because God gave the Israelites that land for themselves. So these foreigners are going to be in a land where they don't have a home. So that is why they voluntarily attach themselves to these homes. And if the master ends up being horrible, they can leave. So it's a mutually beneficial situation. And the moment that it stops being mutually beneficial, they can become a runaway slave. And like I said, you cannot do kidnapping. Again, that's Exodus 21:16. That carries the death penalty for all kidnapped victims, not just Israelites. Now, in terms of the laundry list, back to the old laundry list. When people are treated as chattel, as property, you know what you can do with property? You can do whatever the hell you want to do with property. You can kill. If I have a piece of property, I can smash it, I can throw it in the trash, I can bury it underground, I can do whatever I want to with that property. But God said, no, there are standards. You need to love your servant or slave, your eved, as you love yourself. So you can't treat them like dirt. You got to treat them well. And then in the antebellum South, slaves had no rights of possessions. And when slaves ran away in the antebellum South and in other parts of the ancient Near East, guess what? They were returned, and they had to be returned. In Israel, no, sir. If a runaway slave finds the need to run away from his master, that is presumed to be an indication that the master was mistreating him, and so the master loses out on whatever the benefit of the bargain was that he entered into with that slave. And then you have, in the antebellum South, there was the separation of families with slavery, where a person can buy a bunch of people, and let's say the mother and the father and the children were together. Well, he can then resell the son to one other buyer and the mother to someone else. There was no separation of families. When the Jews took in these servants, according to the Mosaic law, they became a part of the family, the Jewish family. They are told by God, there are passages that talk about how when it's feast days, they are to share their feast with their servants, and they all eat at the table together. And this is not what was going on in the antebellum South. A master in the antebellum South could kill their slaves. That the passages that we have here, the masters would sorry, I was getting a call. In the antebellum South, the masters could just kill their slaves because the slaves were their property. The slaves did not have human rights, whereas in Israel, the slaves the slaves in Israel had the same exact human rights that every other Israelite had. In terms of brutal beatings, we all know, I don't have to tell you that there were horrible, brutal beatings that were going on in the antebellum South. That was not permitted. If it happened, now just because something isn't permitted doesn't mean that it didn't happen. I'm not trying to say that. But if it happened, then if the slave died, then that master gets the death penalty. If the slave did not die but was badly beaten, then the slave gets to go free according to the law. And with the antebellum South, slavery was race-based. In Egypt, in Israel, it wasn't race-based. In fact, we have Israelites that were people of color. And so wasn't it Abraham that took an African wife, if I recall correctly? And of course, with the antebellum South, there was all sorts of kidnapping. I mean, that's how they got them. And just because someone in Africa
start wrapping up.
Selling them someone.
Start wrapping up, Teddy.
Okay, but
I think we've got your drift.
Doesn't mean that when someone purchases them that they're in possession of a kidnapped person. But so anyway, like I said, there's a reason why with the slave Bible, most of the Bible was taken out of it, because the when you read the whole Bible in context, it does not support slavery. In terms of what we think of as slavery in terms of the antebellum South, it was a mutually agreed upon, voluntarily entered into contractual agreement for labor, and as soon as that became abusive, the person can just become a runaway slave and have all sorts of rights. But at that point, they're not being taken care of financially. They have to rely upon just the charity that is extended by the fellow Jews, but that might not be enough for them. But so anyway, what y'all are thinking of as slavery, that is not going on. So that's not what the laws were about.
Let's do this. So as to be somewhat fair to everyone, let's do one more round of questions because I think that went relatively well. And we'll just do a reverse order of those questions. Russell, Chase, me, Teddy, you can ask one question to anyone, maybe a reasonable follow-up. And after that, we will make whatever closing statements need to be made, and I will eat my sandwich. I will say before we enter that round of questions, I'm mostly going to just let Teddy's statement there stand, and I will address it in the comments. I suspect the comments are going to be overflowing this week, so there's going to be a little bit of activity in the comment section. But Russell, I know that you don't have a lot of time to get your hands dirty in the comment section, and you are a truly gentle soul who doesn't enjoy that kind of disputation anyway. So that said, I'm going to give you, obviously, as much time as you want to. If you want to speechify in your question a bit, that's fine, because I know that we're not going to see you much in the comments. So what question do you have? If you want to ask two questions, you're the host. You can do whatever the hell you want. We have two sets of rules. You see, there are the rules for the hosts, and then there are rules for the guests. Now, we will treat the guests Never mind. Russell, what do you got?
I gotta forget that I'm not debating. I'm not the mean debater here. I'm just totally supposed to be here and there. Sorry, Teddy, I stepped on you a lot today.
No, I had good stuff to say.
So my question is to both of you guys. An honest look at this from a historical standpoint. If you're willing to do that, and I know, David, you asked me for a resource as far as comparing antebellum with ancient Near Eastern slavery, especially in regards to Israel. I will post that in the comments if you want to go through that. It's about 44 pages of stuff, and you can take it little by little. It is sectioned. I think it's really good. It also gives you all the resources as well. So if you click on it on the reference, it will take you to an index to show you exactly where that comes from and what ancient Near Eastern text that comes from. So it's very interesting if you want to do that. If you're willing to take an honest look at it and see where we're coming from, that would avoid a lot of mistakes that have been made in here so far, and even on our
just
end,
for clarification,
we're not maybe yeah.
I'm not trying to interrupt. I just want for clarification. The resource that you're talking about, will that so points of differentiation, I'm sure that we can come up with some that I would consider insignificant. Are you suggesting that there are points of differentiation that would make the biblical slavery look like good slavery as opposed to antebellum slavery bad slavery?
No, it's a compare and contrast.
Or at the end of the day, would they both be bad?
I think they're both in the end not ideal.
Well,
all right.
But
so,
would you say they're bad?
No, I would say they're not ideal. I mean, that's the same thing, right? I mean,
no, it's not the same thing. But go ahead. I just wanted that clarification.
I would say that even voluntary, I would probably stick to what Paul said and say involuntary service is probably get out of it. It's not good. So
right.
it's
which is why
bad,
he sent Onesimus
right.
back. But that's okay.
Yeah, but he sent him back for another reason. He sent him back with an order to be free. And he could have used. He even told Philemon, "Hey, I could use my authority here, but because you both are Christians, I want you to resolve it." So I mean, there's that.
But go ahead. You don't have to address anybody. I just wanted that clarification.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not trying to eat into your time.
Let me get back. I mean, if you guys are willing to take an honest look at this entire thing, I will post. I will post it. Like I said, it's 44 page. You can look into it if you want to attack it from an honest standpoint. If your mind's already made up, then just ignore it. I mean, you can. It's your right.
Okay, but don't assume that we on the other side haven't read material like this. I was a Christian.
No, I'm not.
I was a Christian for a long time, Russell. And so this was a very important issue to me. I've done much study. Much of my ministry was in the Ministry of Race Relations. So I have a fairly deep background in this sort of thing. And so I'm not speaking merely for myself. Don't assume that those of us on the other side haven't read this material and don't know what we're talking about.
All right. Well, I will definitely post it, and you guys can take a look at it and rebut it if you'd like. That's fine too.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean
Russell.
Russell.
You're coming up, Teddy. You'll be the last one to be able to ask a question. So hold your powder.
I didn't want it to count.
Hold your powder, Russell. Did you said that you had a question kind of for both of us?
That was it.
Okay.
If you guys are interested, I will post that so you can take a look.
We always appreciate resources.
Yeah. That's pretty much all I got for you guys. I pretty much made my points in my opening, and you guys haven't really been able to shoot those down, even though you say you think you have. But that's just going to be up for the audience to decide. Yeah, but I love you all. I'm glad we were able to have this conversation. I think it was pretty good. I think that every side represented themselves the way they wanted to, and we didn't start swinging at each other. So that's a good thing.
Because that would break a very expensive computer.
Yeah,
so
right.
if it wasn't for that.
These things are
You guys are very charitable. Chase, it was fun. Enjoyed you on here. You're awesome. David, you're also awesome. I know you don't like high praise, but you get it anyway from me. So, all right. That's it for me, man. Go ahead.
That's fine. And look, you don't have to think of this as your last word because you'll get one more shot at it. But Chase, you have a question for one or both of the folks, or for me? So.
I have a question. I have a question for Teddi.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Back, David.
Yeah.
Are you?
Hello.
I think it's more of a repeat question, but are you willing to are you at least willing to agree that no, I don't have a question. I don't have a question.
Okay. Teddy.
I'm sorry.
Teddy, do you have a question?
I do.
Okay.
This one's for you, David.
Lovely.
You have said in the past that you do not believe that there is such a thing as objective evil. And I want to know, are you still sticking to that when we refer to what I think of as the truest form of slavery, chattel slavery, as was exhibited
Yes.
in the antebellum South? Is that objectively evil?
I'm answering your question as asked. Do I believe in objective evil, or am I sticking to what I've said on objective evil before? Yes, I'm sticking to it. No, I don't believe in objective evil. I don't believe in evil as the Christian categorizes it, because you require a God and a will of God to get to evil. And so I don't believe in your God. I don't believe in evil. I don't believe in sin. These are not concepts that make a lot of sense to me. Now, do I believe that slavery is a bad thing, that is antisocial, that is harmful for society, that is harmful for individuals, that is wrong to do for social creatures on a number of levels? Yes, I do. But that has nothing to do with how you formulate objective evil. And so rather than recap that entire discussion again, I think I can just answer the question very simply.
So wouldn't that mean then that with your worldview, certain societies like the United States and the antebellum South can have that kind of reprehensible institution of slavery going on, and that would be okay because it's okay for them, and everything's subjective. So is that so it can be okay for them, and you just
I think
you
your
just
question
personally
is.
don't like them?
I think your question is inflammatory and stupid, and so I'm not going to answer it. And already asked
Well, you
and answered,
love inflammatory questions.
asked and answered many times, and so it's not like I'm not on the record for this kind of thing, and you're just not paying attention to the answer. So that's fine. I don't mind calling that what it is. Did you have another question? Maybe you can do better the next time.
Oh, I think that one nailed it.
Okay, got it right through the heart. All right, then I will ask a question for my co-host.
Sure.
And by the way, David Russell, I do appreciate your genteel spirit and approach. This is not the type of discussion you typically like to have. Welcome to Skeptics and Seekers, my friend. Sometimes it's like this, but most of the time it's not. I do enjoy a good red meat discussion from time to time because I think these
now
issues...
I want a steak.
I always want a steak. I enjoy this because it gets to... It helps cut through some of the bullshit. And I think that some of the more genteel, neighborly academic conversations don't. So this past week on Unbelievable, on suffering, that it came from two very wonderful people. I would have them in my home as guests, but they didn't say anything useful on the subject. And so from time to time, you need this kind of conversation. And so don't expect this all the time. When we have Teddi on the show, this is going to be the conversation. So it doesn't matter what it is. By the way, Chase too. Chase is a bad man. If you think that you can get away with saying stupid stuff around Chase is going to fuck you up. So I also like
he's wearing a Dragon Ball Z shirt. I'd expect nothing less. But then he's got to deal. Then he's got to deal with this. You know.
I love having these types of personalities and these types of shows. But if you and I, for instance, were having this discussion by ourselves, it would have been a different conversation. And I recognize that, and I appreciate your patience. And so with that understanding in mind, I just want to ask you, do you find the skeptic position, and it's not just a skeptic position, by the way. Peter, whose comment I was going to read today, I might read next week because it's a little bit long and we're out of time. But Peter is also a Christian who would largely agree with the skeptics on this. So it's not just a skeptic Christian argument. But do you at least understand where the other side is coming from when they open up their Bible and read the types of passages that we've been talking about today? Do you think that they are just being stupid? Are they uneducated? Are they willful? Are they to come up with these conclusions? How would you categorize that?
I categorize it as you guys are honestly looking at the text and trying to make sense of it. I told you in my opening statement that I struggled with Leviticus 25. I did, and it took a great deal of study. But I'm the type of person that enjoys history. A lot of this was off the top of my head. I only had really 2 days to kind of put stuff together, and this comes from what I studied previously. Obviously, I've done. It did trouble me. So is a skeptic position stupid? No. Is it uneducated? No. You're trying to make best sense of the text. And even in general cursory reading, I came away with some of the same conclusions, like, oh my gosh, what is up with this? But like I said, once diving in, it turned out different, and I come up on a different side of the fence than you do.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, does that answer your question?
It does. It does.
Okay.
And I will, as we close out, I'll give us each a chance to, make our final appeal to the audience because we're done appealing to each other. Russell, you've got the last word if you have anything else in your tank to say.
Yeah, I mean, in the study of biblical slavery, I just want to point everybody that it isn't an easy topic, and we need to take time to actually dive into the text. We have to look into the previous texts and put them together. We can't just look at it in one way and let our bias rule the day. If you want an objective opinion, look into the history. You have to understand things in the light of historical context. You have to understand the ancient Near East. You have to understand why these laws were given. You have to understand the theology behind some of this stuff too. And that takes a great amount of study. And there's some people that don't want to give that the time of day. And if you're that type of person that doesn't want to give it the time of day, don't make the accusation, because you're going to be looking like a deer in the headlights when it comes to somebody that has an answer for it. That's just my closing thoughts to everybody here, to the audience. I think the question is answerable. I think it's logical. I think that we have discussed a great many things, and we weren't able to get a great many things. And this is the problem with this type of format. For any type of format that is live like this, is you're only able to get out so much, and you have to leave a lot on the cutting edge, or the cutting room floor, as they say. So just keep that in mind. Do your homework and come to your conclusion. And if you want to debate it again, I am here. So,
Chase.
Yeah, I mean, as far as this topic goes. I agree. I do agree with my point. It is all in the history there. You do have to look at everything within context, but even so, in answering the question of what, if the question is simply what is the context of what it's talking about, in some cases you can have me go on different commentary, different responses, and sometimes I may even agree. But as far as discussing the rights and wrongs and what it's also advocating for or not advocating for, and within those contexts and things as such, I just think that me and my opponents will, as of right now, agree on what it's really talking about, what it's really saying, and how much this may apply, and where it applies. But yeah, I would definitely love to see in in later conversations where get better explanation from Russell here. Teddy, I would just like to say that maybe you should take a look at cyber history before making the parallel of the two, because it worries me in the things that are ignored, that were vastly ignored in this conversation and just glossed over, and when making the comparisons. I'm not saying that you are entirely wrong, but the things you were connecting did not. It worried me for the reasons why you're connecting them, and the things that that had to be not looked at in that case. And I don't want other Christians to be going down that path too, if this is the path that they're choosing to take, because I cannot force everyone to choose a skeptic's path. So I mean, that's really all I have to say on the matter, is that if anyone has questions for me about it, you can reach me. Or
Teddy.
we'll definitely tell you how to.
Teddy. I know you're there, Teddy.
You're on mute, Teddy.
Teddy, your mic is
Sorry.
muted.
There we go. I'm back. Sorry about that.
But for that brief period of time, you weren't making any nonsense.
I never do. I never
Okay.
do.
You're closing, Teddy.
So the last thing that I would ever do is ignore something that deals with something as serious as slavery, the subjugation of humans. That's not something I would ever ignore different points about or gloss over. I take it with all seriousness. And I think that what happens is that there are a number of things that factor into why so many people think as you, Chase, and David do, about slavery in the Bible and equating it to the horrors of what happened in the antebellum South. And that is partly because we have people have been reading Bibles that now have the word slave peppered throughout, when that wasn't originally what was in the Bible. And so, and then you have other terms that have been used, like property, and things like where they're calling the slave is his money, and things like that, that can give an incorrect impression if you don't go back to see what the original Hebrew said and put it in context with the other passages. To just pull a passage out of the Bible and read it as just a standalone indictment against God, that's not reading something in context. And it's critical that that we look at everything in context. And the biggest thing that puts things into context, these two things, the passage that I'm about to read is 100% incompatible with the type of with chattel slavery, where people are treated as objects, where they're not being given their human rights. And so the type of slavery that was going on in the antebellum South is 100% incompatible with what was going on in terms of what the laws were regulating under the Mosaic Law. It's mentioned in the Bible. Those are incompatible. So Leviticus 19:33 says again, if a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. Were the African slaves in the antebellum South mistreated? Absolutely. Far more than just mistreated. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you. Were the African slaves in the antebellum South treated like the other white people in the South? Of course not. And you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Were the African slaves in the antebellum South loved the way the slave master loved himself and his family and his fellow white people? Of course not. So this totally evidences the sharp distinction between what was going on in Israel that was being regulated under Mosaic law and what was going on in the antebellum South. And again, God was not keen on people even getting into this type of servitude, but people were doing it because they needed to. They were desperate. Even though the Israelites were commanded to help the poor, that wasn't always enough. And so if people were in real dire straits, that was the way that they were going to get shelter. That was the way that they were going to get food. And they voluntarily gave up a certain degree of their freedom for being taken care of. And we have to remember, for example, even today, when a professional athlete gets into a contract with an owner of a football team, basketball team, they get bought, quote unquote. They get sold, quote unquote, and they also get traded. And but that's something that is an agreement between the two parties that's voluntarily entered into, and they voluntarily enter into it because they are both getting something out of it. Just like when people enlist in the military, they are giving up a lot of their rights as well, yet they're getting something out of it. And in many cases, especially with our people that volunteer in the military, and also those who are drafted, they're serving our country. But that's an additional thing. But anyway, so I very much so think that there is a very sharp contrast between what went on in terms of being regulated under Mosaic law, because God knew that people would end up doing this sort of thing. And so he wanted to put in protections for the people that would get into this type of servitude so that there wouldn't be abuses. Because when people have free will, bad things can happen. So these were protections, not God sanctioning the saying, hey, this is a great idea for people to get into. This was a last resort for people. It wasn't the first thing people would do. So, the God of the Bible is no moral monster, and all of the passages that I have mentioned during this talk show that he wants us all to recognize that we are brothers and sisters, and that we are to treat each other and love each other as we would want to be treated, and we love ourselves the way we love ourselves, we love other people.
Okay. Great. I don't have a prepared close. Some of the things I thought that I might say, I think I won't. I'm rendered almost speechless, confused, befuddled at some of the arguments that I have encountered today. I am not a slave, but my ancestors were slaves. I know what slavery is, and I know what slavery can do to people generations after. It's not a thing to be taken lightly as just some one-off thing that happened to someone because they were poor at the time. And having studied slavery, I know what slavery looks like in many cultures, regardless of the language, in many times. And slavery pretty much always has the same effect on people in those cultures and those times. And you can trace that throughout history. And so we can set aside the games of language that try to confuse the issue. This is not a linguistic problem. We know what slaves are. And so how did skeptics come to their opinions about what this is, about what the Bible says? How did we come to that? Did we start with some presupposition? Well, many of us, like myself, started off as Christians, and we came to this on that side of the fence. So that's not the case. In fact, I see Christians involved in a lot of motivated reasoning and question begging. And the question being begged is they begin their argument, they begin their research with God is good. God is morally perfect. And so however we read these texts on slavery, it has to end up with God is morally perfect. And so we must read it in that light. I dare say if we took all of the passages of slavery and we put them into Hitler's Mein Kampf, we would say that they were the ravings of an evil madman. But in the Bible, since they are God's law, we have to start with, well, God is good. And so we have to interpret and reinterpret it in that light. I find the motivated reasoning being on the side of the Christian. Where did I learn what biblical slavery was? I didn't learn it from atheists. I learned it from Christians. Christians taught me what biblical slavery was. Chase, I gave you a bit of a reading earlier today. I'll give you half a second to pull that up. Darren put out a comment. I don't remember the correct attributions. It'll be on the web, and I will probably promote this particular resource into the main blog so that people can look at it, as I will any resources that people in the show have to present. But if you want to know how people came to understand what biblical slavery was, they came to understand it from Christians reading the Bible. And as far as antebellum slavery, that slavery was modeled after what they read about in the Bible. You can say, well, they were wrong in their understanding, but it wasn't atheists misusing the Bible to get there. It was Christians teaching the rest of the world what biblical slavery was. Chase, would you read this? Is a little bit lengthy, and I just don't want to. So if you would, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure thing. The emphasis pro-slavery defenders was always upon a literal reading of the Bible, which represented the mind and will of God himself, not only justified but also moral. Responds to the emphasis upon the principles of Christianity used by those opposed to slavery. To the open-ended interpretive religion implied by those opposed to slavery, a planned, concise statement of certain propositions that we presume few fearful believers will controvert. 1. That the volume of sacred writings commonly called the Bible, comprehending the Old and New Testaments, containing the unerring decisions of the Word of God. 2. That these decisions are of equal authority in both testaments, and that this authority is essential veracity of God, who is truth itself. 3. That since there can be no prescription against the authority of God, that whatever is declared at any part of the Holy Bible to be lawful or illicit must be essentially so in its own nature. However repugnant such declaration may be to the current opinions of men during any period of time. 4. That as the supreme lawgiver and judge of man, God is infinitely just and wise in all decisions, and is essentially irresponsible for the reasons of his conduct in the moral government of the world. So it is culpability audacious in us to question the rectitude of any of those decisions, merely because we do not apprehend the inscrutable principles of such wisdom and justice. And 5, that if one or more decisions of the written word of God sanction the rectitude of any human accusations, for instance, the acquisition of a servant by the inheritance of purchase, whoever believes that the written word of God is variety itself must consequently believe that in the absolute rectitude of slave holding. Amen.
Okay, so I will include this reading in the notes when I update the blog, but this is actually a much longer document. So if you want to read at least one of many of the Christians' full statements on how they came to defend slavery, it's all from a biblical perspective. And in fact, there are many Christians here today who, some among our fellow posters, who say that they would, in fact, do things that God tells them to do, even if it violated their moral conscience, because they would have to assume that the conscience is faulty, and that the morally perfect God is right. And so, of course, they would have to be certain that the command is coming from the morally perfect God, which is very reasonable. But by that argument, we can't then read back our morality into the Bible and say, well, the Bible couldn't have been condoning this horrific institution. It seems to clearly be condoning or regulating this horrendous institution. And in order to save God, modern Christians have to do mental gymnastics that I frankly am too old and inflexible to keep up with. And so that's on me. It's on me that I can't see biblical slavery as a voluntary thing. Oh yes, they want it to be slaves. Not only a voluntary thing, but they volunteered for life without the possibility of freedom. Yes, of course this was a voluntary thing. They were bought voluntarily by people. This is how we can think of it. Maybe if I studied harder, I would see that the word slave just can't be understood. I mean, it's such a complicated term, and there's so many words for it. We don't know what the right word is for it, but we should trust the Bible and our modern English translations, because that's all we got. We don't speak Greek or Hebrew, and yet we can't trust the Bible when it talks about slave. It's just using the wrong word, but otherwise trust it. And when it says things like property, you'll be property, and you can be bequeathed to children as inheritance of property. It takes a little bit more digging to understand what property means. We don't know what property means. We
Put
just
the
we
cat out of here.
okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Cat's welcome as far as I'm concerned.
Having the same problem.
Um,
I heard it earlier.
so yeah, we don't understand. We don't have enough education to know what words mean. Like, they'll be your property. So yeah, I guess I am too old and too inflexible to read it a certain way. For instance, when female slaves um, are taken as wives. We're not just talking about arranged marriages here. I'll buy a woman and make her my wife. It reminds me of the Russian bride things. For you lonely nerds out there who could not get a date, you know what I'm talking about. You saw these ads. Buy yourself a Russian bride. Pay $3,000. We'll send one right over to you. There's some members in my audience who have probably who have done this, but they're too ashamed to say. We would say that that's wrong. They would say, "Oh, no, it was just an arranged marriage." No, but we're to think of that as a great evil thing if it happens today. But it was a good thing. I mean, that's how they married. That's what marriage meant. You bought a woman, and you had sex with her until you didn't like it anymore, and then you let her go and you bought another woman. That's right. Now me, I'm a simple kind of guy. I'm just an old country preacher. That seems wrong to me. I don't know. That seems bad. But I am told by the more academically inclined that was really okay. So I am appalled by this type of argument. I did not encounter this type of argument when I was in the church. People were more straightforward about it. They made different kinds of justifications for God's actions, but they didn't try to convince me that the words didn't mean what they meant, or that the people were really happy being slaves, or that when slaves were taken in war, well, that was different and better. And the child wives that were too young to have had sex before. And really think about it. In the ancient Near East, how young did you have to be a woman who had not had sex with a man? Also, how did they determine a woman who had sex with a man? I mean, I can think of some ways that, we used to do it in this country. Surely they wouldn't have done that. No, this is embarrassing. It's embarrassing to me to watch intelligent, good, moral Christians argue this way. This is embarrassing to me. I am embarrassed to ever have called myself a Christian, to have ever thought this way. I am ashamed of it. I'm ashamed, frankly, of you who are on this show arguing this way. I'm ashamed of you in the argument, in the comments, who argue this way. I am ashamed of you, and you should be ashamed of yourself. This is not intellectually honest. It's a lie. And why do you lie? In service of making this monster God of yours seem like he's not a monster. It's terrible. And you will gain no converts this way. We are not fooled. We can read the words. We know what it means. We know what it says. Stop it. You're not helping yourself. I much more appreciate someone who looks at the text and says, yes, this was awful, and then says something to the effect of, yes, but this wasn't from God. This was their misunderstanding. They thought it was from God. They were wrong. They were sinful people, but God continued to give them progressive revelation until they finally got the truth of it sometime after the Bible was finished writing. That's a terrible argument, but it's so much better than the arguments that we've heard today. It's so much better. I'm so ashamed of people who say this thing wasn't monstrous because over here there was something even worse. Really? So, it's now okay if we can find a slavery that was worse than the slavery in the Bible. Then it's not much. Yes, it's still monstrous. Who do you think you're fooling with this? Nobody is deceived by this. And I am ashamed that the conversation about something this important goes to that level. I am ashamed. I'm ashamed that was me. sitting in David Russell's chair some 10, 12 years ago, making really bad arguments in defense of something that's indefensible, because I had to start with the position that God was perfect. And I had to defend everything. I had to defend it. I had to defend slavery. I had to defend the war crimes. I had to defend the 10th plague. I had to defend the David's trilemma. I had to defend all of that crap. And I wasn't any more intellectually honest. And that is why I'm not really coming down on my interlocutors as it sounds like I am. I am ashamed of myself. And I'm ashamed of anyone that I may have swayed by arguments like that. It's wrong. It's not academic. It's not intellectual. It's dishonest. And we just have to stop talking about it that way. The God of the Bible is a moral monster, and it's not just slavery, but just talking about slavery in the most genteel terms you can think of. It's still bad. It's still a thing that you wouldn't sell your daughter into today. And we still have to wonder why the God of the Bible was so tough that he could stop the eating of shellfish, but he couldn't simply say, look, just don't own people as property. Finally, yes, are there passages in the Bible that are less harsh on the subject of slavery? Absolutely. I don't want to run from those. And I don't understand them all. I don't understand everything in the Bible. Like I said, simple country preacher. Some of this stuff is over my head. I don't know Hebrew. I studied Greek a little bit. Didn't help. I can tell you right now, if you study Hebrew and Greek, it won't help in this particular argument. And I've come to the conclusion, as I did when I was a Christian, that not every writer in the Bible was on the same page. They had different ideas at different times about some of these things. But my case today does not depend on consistency in the Bible. You only need to find one example and one passage that is clear and true and honest, that shows slavery to be the thing that we think it is, and that shows God saying, it's okay for you to do this. That's all it takes. That case is trivially easy. It's been trivially made. It was made in the first few minutes of this conversation. I think it'll be made many, many times over the discussion board. And I hope that this is the last time this season we have a discussion that feels so wrong. I want to have honest conversations about honest differences. There's not a person on this panel who would look at the biblical slavery and say, yeah, I'll sign up for that, or I want my kids to sign up for that. Everyone on this panel is anti-slavery in every form of slavery that we can think of. So don't listen at them and think that they are somehow pro-slavery. They are not. These are my friends, and yes, I am verbally abusing them a little bit right now, but I would give them each a kidney if it would save their lives. But on a subject like this, we require a little bit more honesty and integrity, and not starting with a conclusion that God must be good. Let's just start with the words. Let's live with the consequences of those words, and let's find other ways, if you want to be a Christian, to defend your God. Don't make people who are reading the Bible think that they read it wrong. They didn't read it wrong, guys. You didn't read it wrong. So I'm gonna leave it there, and
I'm here.
Next week we will be doing politics. That'll be much easier, right? Nothing controversial.
Hello, Lucy. Politics. Hello, I'm home, honey.
We've got David being reunited with his family, and we will spend the next 30 minutes watching that. Actually, we will be closing right now. And so once again, thank you for everyone on the panel, and we'll see you all in the comments. Goodbye.